Should we get going? 1 minute. My iPhone doth not lie.
Mr. Chairman, we're just copying one slide to two places. We're good, so go ahead.
All right. Let's call this meeting of the TRPA Regional Planning Implementation Committee to order. The date is Wednesday, September 27th, 2023, and it is 3:40 p.m. First item on the agenda is a roll call to determine quorum. Maria?
Ms. Aldine? Here. Ms. Dis?
Here.
Ms. Gustafson? Here. Ms. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Honigman?
Here.
Mr. Settlemyer? Here. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Maria. Now I'll go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for September 27th, 2023. There you'll find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you'll be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you use the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on agenda items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the board takes any action. Members of the public participating via Zoom identifying themselves with an obscene, slanderous, or offensive name will not be called on to make public comment. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I would like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they're able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment, and you'll be called to the front to speak. To ensure everyone has time to make their desired comment, you can agree with the previous commenter rather than making comments that repeat what others have said. All right. Let's see. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. If committee members need to ask clarifying questions during the presentation, please do so, but we'll save our deliberation until after the presentation is complete. All right, so with that huge mouthful done, the next item is approval of the agenda.
There are no changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, great. So we'll deem the agenda approved as posted. And the next item we are on to, agenda item number 2, is approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from the August 23rd, 2023 meeting on page 45. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change? All right, Shelley.
I have some clerical edits that I will share with Maria. Wasn't able to do that before the meeting. With that, I will move to approve the minutes from the RPIC meeting of August 23rd, 2023 as amended.
Great, thank you. Let's see, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone oppose? All right, the motion passes. All right, so that brings us to agenda item number 3, an informational update and possible direction to staff on phase 2 housing amendments, including proposed changes to the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 13, area plans, Chapter 36, design standards, Chapter 37, height, Chapter 31, density, Chapter 30, land coverage, Chapter 34, parking policies, Chapter 52, bonus unit incentive program, and Chapter 90, definitions and changes to the goals and policies, land use and housing sections that would only apply to projects applying for deed restricted bonus units. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 265 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on, or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. We also have received a lot of written comments on this item. So if you have submitted them, committee members, including myself, have read them. So hopefully you can keep your comments short, your spoken comments short. All right, so now I'd like to ask John to introduce the staff to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I keep going? There we go. All right, thank you. I want to mention, just kind of set the context for this, try not to be redundant with what Alyssa's going to present, but you all probably remember in July of 2022, we had a workshop with different stations and you gave us a lot of input about what you would like us to work on. And a lot of that came from the recommendations from the Tahoe Living Working Group. But one of the things that you said to us loud and clear that we heard was, this is a big problem and we need to go bold. And so we took you at your word. And you also said to us that you don't want to do things that just sound like good policy. You want it to have some basis in what the market can actually do. So one of the things we did was we hired a group called Cascadia Partners, who actually work with people who do real development, real affordable housing development. And we asked them to help us determine what we needed to do to actually propose policy changes to you that would result in the market delivering some housing. So you might remember that what they did was they gave us a scale that took us from basically where we are now to certain sets of policies would reduce the prices by certain amounts. And we were able to get a set of recommendations that got us into the 120% to 180% AMI range. And that includes changes to some of TRPA's policies, as well as changes related to parking, which we obviously have the authority to address parking, but we never have done that before. So where we are today, and I just want to emphasize this before I turn it over to Alyssa, is we've put together a package that's in that 120 to 180 range. There are some options within that range to go with a little less parking, things like that. But this is where we want to finalize that set of recommendations. Because from here on out, we're going to go through formal hearings with APC back to you all for formal recommendation and then back to the governing board. We heard loud and clear you'd like to get through this phase this calendar year. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Alyssa to take us through this. And just again, this is the chance to put the bow on the package so we can start to deliver the present.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the members of RPIC for hanging in there for this late agenda item. I'm Alyssa Bettinger. I'm a senior planner with TRPA, and I am here to present the informational update on the Phase 2 housing amendments. Like many communities across the country, Tahoe is suffering from a crisis of affordability. The median home size in the past 50 years has more than doubled, and along with it, so has the price to live here. So much so to the point that many in our community can no longer afford to live in the region. And we know that when people can't live here, we not only lose our community, but we do get further from meeting the goals that were outlined in our regional plan. Next slide, please. So for the last couple of years, TRPA has been looking at our role in the housing crisis and how we can reshape certain policies that get us closer to meeting our thresholds and the goals of our regional plan. And these include more concentrated development close to centers, implementing stormwater treatment systems built along with the housing that better meet our water quality standards, higher density higher density along our transit corridors that help us achieve our transportation, specifically our transit goals, and housing that is smaller, more dense, and inherently more affordable, helping us to meet our housing goals. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, for the past few years, we've been working on this. So in 2020, we kicked off our Tahoe Living and Community Revitalization Strategic Initiative. And we've been working very closely with our Tahoe Living Working Group to develop these policy changes. Phase 1 was focused on making changes to allow accessory dwelling units on smaller lots within the basin, as well as encouraging older motels to convert to long-term residential housing. Phase 2 is what we're here to talk about today, and that is really focused on making it more financially feasible to build bonus units in the basin. It also helps local jurisdictions be more competitive for grants, and for the California jurisdictions to achieve their RHNA requirements. Phase 3, which we're planning to begin in the new year, we'll use our recent grant to take sort of a larger look at how some of our longstanding policies, like our development rights system, permitting, fees, how we can make those more equitable. Next slide, please. So again, the focus of the presentation today is on phase 2, our development standards. And just want to provide a little bit of context before we get into it. So as you all know, TRPA sets a cap on the amount of development that can happen, and that was through those caps were approved under the 1987 and 2012 regional plans. We're not changing those caps with this proposal. None of those caps are changing. We are specifically looking at how we can make our existing pool of bonus units, again, more financially feasible. There's 3 important numbers to keep in mind as we go through this. That 50,000 number is the total amount of residential units that were allowed under the regional plan. The majority of that has already been built out. So we have about 3,500 residential units remaining to be distributed. And within that 3,500 number, about a quarter of those, 946, are bonus units. And bonus units, I think most of you are familiar, but bonus units are residential units that are distributed to projects that are deed restricting the unit to either affordable, moderate, or achievable housing. And I'll get into that more in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So development standards influence what gets built on the ground. One of the ways that we can get more concentrated development in and near our town centers that is beneficial for our environment and communities is through changes to our development standards. And when we talk about development standards, we're really talking about coverage, height, and density that are set at the TRPA level, as well as parking and setbacks that are set, or we defer to the local jurisdictions to set. Next slide, please. And we are not unique in looking at whether we can make changes to these development standards to increase the affordability of housing. This is happening across a lot of mountain towns all over the West, as well as, at the state level in a lot of states. And the question that you can go back one slide. Thanks. The question that we have been asking is, if we allow higher density, for example, how much do those changes influence the cost to build? And so, as John mentioned, in the last year or so, since we did the housing workshop with governing board, we've done another analysis with Cascadia Partners to help answer those questions. And we found that making changes to development standards, specifically height, density, and coverage and parking, can reduce rents by nearly 40%, which is shown in these slides. So really, this goes to show that by making these changes, we can produce housing units at a cheaper cost, without the huge subsidies that are required today and that we have seen oftentimes in previous months. Next slide. In addition to the Cascadia analysis, we've also been meeting with a variety of local groups and attending a lot of community events this summer. And there are a lot of good ideas for solutions in the community. So we have used the Cascadia analysis as a baseline, but the proposal has evolved and been shaped by the engagement that we've had along the way. So I'll point out examples of where things have changed from the Cascadia analysis or since you've last seen it as I go through the proposal. Next slide, please. So again, the proposal would apply to only deed restricted units. TRPA currently has 3 deed restriction levels. The affordable and moderate deed restrictions are income-based, so they need to be either below 80% or 120% of the area median income. There's a couple examples shown on this slide for Placer and Douglas counties. We also have a higher deed restriction level called the achievable level. This is new since 2018, and it's really targeting that local worker requirement. So there is no income limit with the achievable deed restriction. It is pretty simply that at least one occupant within the unit has to be working at least 30 hours per week for an employer within the Tahoe Basin. Again, we have 946 bonus units left in our pools under the 2012 regional plan. This is not changing with this proposal. These units will be developed likely regardless of whether we make these changes or not. But we are hoping to get these units, out the door quicker and concentrated in and near our town centers. Next slide, please. So the proposal would apply in 2 kind of distinct locations throughout the basin. The first is within our town centers. Our town centers are, walking distance to shops, grocery stores, bike infrastructure, transit. There's a lot of commercial right now in our town centers, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. We want to incentivize residential growth in our centers where people can actually live and not have to drive a car everywhere. So these are the town centers on the North Shore. Next slide, please. And on the South Shore. Next slide. So within these town center locations, we are proposing to allow an additional 9 feet of height. We currently allow 56 feet, which is about 4 stories. We're proposing to go up to 65 feet, which is about 5 stories. This is specifically for deed restricted housing. So all of the bullets on this slide would be applied only to deed restricted. We are proposing to allow coverage over 70%. We currently allow 70% or up to 70% in our town centers. We're proposing to allow higher than 70% when water quality standards can be met through stormwater infrastructure. We're proposing to remove the density maximums from deed restricted units. This is really to encourage smaller units. So our density standards right now are relatively low for urban areas, and they contribute and result in these large units. And so we're proposing to remove the density maximum and leave it to kind of the overall building footprint to dictate how many units can be built. And then last, we are proposing to cap the amount of parking that local jurisdictions can require to no more than 0.75 spaces per unit. And I do want to note here that this doesn't mean that the developer can't provide more. It just means that the local jurisdiction can't require more. So right now, the local jurisdictions require between 1 and 2, give or take, spaces per unit. So we would be reducing that to 0.75 spaces per unit on average. Next slide, please. And height, I just wanted to throw this slide in here because I think height can be a little abstract when you're just talking about it in terms of feet. So I wanted to highlight a few examples of buildings that we currently have in Tahoe that are higher than 56 feet. The Heavenly Village, the Hilton Vacation Club, I think is what it is now at the end of Ski Run Boulevard on the South Shore, and then the Pepper Tree Inn up in Tahoe City. These are all buildings that are above 56 feet. So just wanted to provide that kind of visual guidance. And Tracy, if you could go back to the previous slide. I just want to stop here and ask, are there any clarifications? I'd like to hold most of the discussion for the end, but if anyone has any clarifications on the proposal, happy to try to answer those now.
Yeah, Alyssa, I just, in our packet on page 266, says the total number of remaining bonus units is 862. In your presentation, you used the number 946.
Yeah. So this number is sort of in flux because it's coming out of our pool of bonus units, and projects are coming in and trying to reserve bonus units. So there is just a discrepancy, but we are going with the 946 number right now because we feel that that is the number of bonus units that haven't been like fully reserved.
Okay, thank you.
I'll keep plugging away. If there's no other questions, you can go. Yeah, perfect. So the next area that the proposal would apply to are what we call our areas that are zoned for multifamily. And these, I know this map is kind of hard to see, but these are the areas that are shown in lighter orange on the screen, sort of the areas that are just directly adjacent to our town centers that where we already allow for multifamily. But because of our development standards, among other factors, it makes it really hard to actually build more than one unit in these areas. So the second piece of the proposal would apply here. Next slide. And again, these are the same areas on the North Shore. So within these areas, we are proposing an additional, we're proposing more flexibility with roof pitch right now. So we have some pretty specific requirements right now in Chapter 37 of our code that dictates height based on roof pitch and slope of the parcel. So these amendments would make or would be more flexible with the amount of roof pitch, or I guess it would be more flexible with a shallower roof pitch. And this leads to more energy efficient buildings. It leads to more livable space. So we're not necessarily increasing the amount of height that you can get, but we are allowing a shallower roof pitch so you can sort of realize or use the space. It's not just wasted to a large attic, essentially. We're proposing additional land coverage up to 70%, again, if projects can meet our water quality standards. Again, deed restricted projects would be exempt from the density maximums that we currently have in an effort to encourage smaller size units. And then last, we're proposing to develop transition areas between town centers and multifamily areas. So looking at the parcels that are directly adjacent to town centers and allowing a bit more height on those specific parcels to sort of to avoid having an abrupt transition between town centers where we allow up to 65 feet with this proposal down to 36 feet. And the transition areas, that is new, that is relatively new part of the proposal. So happy to take any questions on that. Next slide, please. And then we have received a few questions about how this proposal would apply to ADU and mixed use developments. It would apply to both mixed use projects that have commercial on the ground floor and then 100% deed restricted units above could qualify for the coverage, height and density and parking incentives. Accessory dwelling units would, if they are deed restricted, they could qualify for the additional coverage incentives that are listed in this proposal. Next slide, please. So TRPA since 2012 has been delegating certain authority to our local jurisdiction partners through the use of local area plans. And height and density and parking are standards that are listed in area plans. Because of the regional need for housing and the urgency of it, we're proposing that these changes would supersede standards in local area plans. So these would go into effect within 60 days of approval by the governing board. Again, only for deed restricted units, not all development. but it would not require that local jurisdictions go through an area plan amendment process. That said, if the local jurisdictions do want to opt out through an area plan amendment, they can do so, but they would need to demonstrate that any changes to coverage, height, and density and parking would facilitate the construction of housing. And there's a number of ways that they could do this, but one option could be providing a direct subsidy to housing if they, for example, were reducing the allowable height from 65 feet. Next slide, please. So that those slides kind of conclude the proposal. I do want to note that we, in the last week or so, we've done, or we've had a couple of public input opportunities. We had a public webinar last Tuesday night, as well as we released a flash vote survey. And this is a third-party company that we contracted with to get some input on these housing amendments. And we have, largely been asking people whether they are okay with taller and denser buildings in and near town centers, if it meant that more housing or more affordable housing options were available to them. And both the public webinar and the flash vote survey really showed that people are split. It's kind of 50-50. And I think that shows that some folks think that we need to do much more, and some folks think that we need to do much less. So we do feel like this proposal is finding a balance between those two. And I do want to note that if you are interested, the full results of our flash vote survey are on our website, as well as we received over 100 questions and comments at the public webinar last week, and we've gone through and provided answers to all of those. Those are also on our website at trpa.gov. So if RPIC members or anyone listening is interested, I would encourage you to go there. Next slide, please. So today, as John mentioned, we are really asking for input on the final package before we start the final hearing process, which we're expecting to do in November with APC and coming back to RPIC before targeting the governing board or the December governing board meeting for consideration. We have been working pretty diligently on our environmental analysis. We're targeting October 8th as the date to release that IEC. But that IEC is based on the proposal that you've seen today. So anytime the proposal changes, the analysis changes as well. So again, just to reiterate what John said, we really, want to sort of finalize this proposal before we can release that IEC. So with that, I will turn it back over to RPIC.
Great, thank you, Alyssa, and thank you to the whole team, all the staff who've been working on this. This has been a long process, and a lot of public input was gathered and hashed out, and a lot of board input. And I think you've come up with something really exciting that hopefully allows us to help solve the problem. So,
Mr. Chair, could I say one thing?
yes,
I think we were pleasantly surprised with the poll outcome, 50% for, 30% against, 20%. Those are approximate numbers because she had more detail, but because we had heard a lot along the way from people who didn't like things, but we just thought it is important that you see these most recent polls and hear about the webinar data.
yeah, that's great. And we know from studies that the people who come to speak at meetings often aren't completely representative of the general sentiment out in the public. So it's good to see some polling done. So thank you for doing that. So now I guess committee questions. Any questions on this? Yes, Shelley.
Thank you. So I guess the idea of increased height by right concerns me only in that I think height, especially at six stories, can have a shadowing effect on adjacent properties. I was doing some research on, and now in many urban areas, they're requiring a shadow analysis. Because if you build a new building and it's in front of an existing building, it can cast shade on the adjacent building. It can have an impact on the quality of life for the people in the existing building. It can interfere with the line of sight to commercial properties, you know, that rely on people passing by and shopping on impulse. And I'm just wondering if we shouldn't take that into consideration.
Yeah, we can definitely take shade into consideration. It, we could go as far as requiring a shade analysis, something like that. I think it's just important to consider that anytime you're putting additional requirements on these projects, it does, there's pros and cons of
No,
it.
no, yeah, and unless I understand that, but on the other hand, you know, I also have sympathy for the people who may be negatively impacted by a tall building in a relatively confined area. And so, you know, and it's hard for me to sit here today without a complete looking at a map with an inventory of all the potential locations. And I don't know whether or not we put that together to know where these opportunities lie within these various communities. But, you know, I'm not trying to make this, you know, more difficult for developers, but on the other hand, I don't want it to become, you know, a detriment to the people who have already invested in buildings and properties and businesses.
Could I
in the
direct you
area.
to page 280,
To
the note on the bottom? It's not like we didn't think about this, so what you'll see is the note on the bottom is when
Okay.
you get to 4 stories, you have to start setting the building back.
Right, but it can still shade. In other words, the buildings in back of the building, regardless of whether you step it back, that addresses the 0 lot line setback.
No, this is when you get to the height.
Yeah,
This is
sun,
for just specifically to prevent a tall building from casting a shadow.
Yeah, but it still extends up 6 stories, right? What am I missing
At
here?
Sun angle.
at 4, it sets back so that the shade, there is no additional shade.
yeah,
Well, on the buildings behind the building,
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, sun angle, that's how they generally do it. I mean, right now, if it steps back there at that level, it shouldn't cast any more shadow than an existing building today
That's
does.
exactly what, that's exactly what the
Yeah.
note A at the bottom of that page is for. Is because we were worried about exactly that same thing.
Do you have an example of that in your presentation, Melissa?
Yeah, I can go back to those. Let's see, Tracy, can you go back to those? I just keep flipping back. This one, yeah. Oh. Next one. This one. This is kind of, and it's a little bit zoomed out, so you can't really see the step backs, but this would be kind of the closest
Which one are you referring to?
example.
I don't see it.
So the Heavenly Village that's 5 stories. And you can see it's 6, certain places.
Well, there's a step down on the right-hand side, but,
The right one is 4 stories sets back. One on the bottom,
yeah.
Hilton Vacation Club.
Okay, so if you have a building, if you have a home, if you have a business behind that building, it's not only interfering with the line of sight to that business, but it's also casting some sort of shadow on that business to bring.
But above 4 stories, shadow is because of setback. So you would have, you had a 4-story building now, which is allowed. You would get the same.
How about interfering with line of sight, John?
You mean to
Well,
view shed, scenic
again,
view shed?
I don't have a map in front of me, so I don't know exactly where these eligible parcels are, but conceivably you could have a parcel that's in the middle of a, you know, commercial district, and somebody decides to build a 6-story affordable housing project. And it's between the road and a commercial establishment behind the building. I mean, what sort of, if we're allowing additional height, I don't have as much of a problem with density, you know, and parking as I do with height being, you know, a matter of right. I think it really depends on location, don't you think?
Well, if I understand your question, you're saying if I'm on a street or a sidewalk
Right,
and I want to see a building that's back behind the new building that's built,
right.
whether it's 4 stories or 6 stories with a setback, I don't think you're gonna see that building.
If I could elaborate, I believe that what Shelley's talking about is currently your house might be able to see the lake, but somebody builds an extra story on it, you might not be able to.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure you are allowed 4 stories now. So I'm not sure going from 4 to 6 is gonna block a single family homes, Lakeview, in a town center. That's what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I just, you know, again, if you have a lot, for example, that is in the middle of town and they decide, a developer decides to build a 6-story affordable housing project on it. You know, whether it's 4 stories or 6 stories, it could interfere with, well, it could interfere with lines of sight to existing buildings and existing businesses, existing homes. I mean, I just don't want to lose control of the review process by saying, you got a piece of property, you can build a 6-story, you know, building on that property, regardless of the impacts to surrounding properties.
No, our scenic standards you still have to meet.
Well, scenic with respect to Lake Tahoe, right?
No, but there are also points you have to be able to see the ridge line.
So they won't
Well-
exceed the height of the ridge line. They won't exceed the height of the canopy, tree canopy. In some cases, they
It's-
probably will. No, they
Probably
still,
not. Probably not.
probably
Yeah,
not,
we have
but are we still
I have a
opposing
single-
that?
Single parcel, but some. If they, anywhere that's a scenic spot in our scenic system, the example I'm thinking of is where you all walked after the tour
Right.
in Placer.
Right,
Their hotel that's proposed, I'm sorry, Cindy left, but one of the proposals was to go higher, this kind of height. And so we checked to see, you could still see the ridge.
yeah, it
line.
was right on the roadway, right.
And
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple clarifications, and we are proposing to go from 4 to 5 for deed restricted, so not 6, 5 stories. And our existing scenic, so we have quite a few findings in chapter 37 of our code, those would still apply. And then any developments over 4 units, they go to our hearings officer, as well as whatever discretionary processes they go through with the local jurisdiction. So there is, you know, we feel there's a lot of safeguards in place that will prevent us from getting, you know, buildings that are not going to fit in with community character.
Okay, so let me, and maybe this is, I'm veering off track. I'm sorry. I'm just kind of doing this kind of a stream of consciousness here. So the parking standards are being reduced to 0.75. I mean, the developer can opt to have more parking if he or she decides that's what they want to do to accommodate their prospective renters. You know, the issue of evacuation keeps coming up, and if people don't have cars and public transportation isn't running because of an emergency of conflagration of some sort, how are those people getting out? How are they gonna, I mean, I know it's a complex question and probably a difficult one to answer because it's kind of a matter of supposition, but
we actually talked with, you remember you had a presentation on evacuation.
right,
Two meetings ago, we actually talked to some of the law enforcement people about it. And what they do is they mobilize a fleet of school buses, shuttle buses that the resorts use, the public transportation, TART and TTD, and they have areas that they know they need to go into. So that's the kind of, for people who don't have cars, or to put this in a little bit, 2 other points, to put this in a little bit of perspective, this type of development along transit ways and along evacuation routes at higher density is what they actually recommend as the most fire safe development. There's even some guidance that California puts out for CEQA that says that. And the third point is, with 950 units, and we're reducing it by 0.75 from 1.5, say, that's really only 700 parking spaces around the basin, 715. And I'm pretty sure from my experience working in other jurisdictions where they have reciprocal parking agreements, you're really going to have spaces for cars. It's just, they won't be required to be necessarily part of the development. For example, you might have a reciprocal agreement if you're in a development with a grocery store next door.
so John, I guess my question is, I think there's a reference in here to some sort of parking management program that they're gonna have to develop. The developer will have to develop the parking management program
We're recommending local governments do that.
on behalf of the developer.
Well, just in general.
No, but in connection with a specific project. I mean, if you're bringing in a lot of additional residents, and those residents have cars and they're only affording 0.75 spaces per unit, is that really the responsibility of local government to be developing a parking management project plan for a specific project?
No. We're not saying they have to do that. We're suggesting that local governments may want to develop parking management plans within the town centers anyway. But if a developer wants to build more than 3/4 of a space per unit, they can.
Well,
They're
they
not
can't,
gonna-
but what I'm saying is the developer, and I'm not trying to bash developers because my family's in that business, but, you know, if it's a matter of economy, you know, they don't want to add to their burden, their financial burden, and developing a parking management plan, you know, that identifies alternate parking for people who may be occupying a unit in their building. That's something they're gonna do voluntarily, so that burden falls to someone else. And even though they've created the problem, right, they've solved a problem with respect to providing affordable housing, but they may have created a problem because there's insufficient parking to meet the needs of their tenants.
Well, I've worked where we've actually removed parking requirements. The developers will put in what they need to make their project financially viable. I know that from experience.
And I
We're-
think, yeah, can I jump in just for
Sure,
a minute to,
sure.
I think all of us in local government, and I could speak for all of our partners, I think. I shouldn't say all, but for most of us, we understand that the only way we're gonna get the much highly valued local workers back here is to develop situations to help developers do this.
Mhm.
Even at these heights, I think there's going to be public subsidy, public involvement, public mitigations that are coming forward to try to make this work. And, you know, if we need to talk more about those programs, because I know Placer County is looking at parking management and a pilot program in the Kings Beach grid area, where we have seen a lot of overflow from our state recreation beaches and people avoiding paying that and parking in the grid, those sorts of things. So we're very aware that we're going to have to be part and parcel of making these projects work if we're going to do it, because the highest and best value for anybody's property is single family residential condos.
Tracy, could you go back to that
With no
slide
deed
again?
restrictions. So we're going to have to put a combination of factors together to
Yeah.
make
No,
it
the
work.
one with the
But I
scale.
do share Shelley's concern about, you know, she wants to know how that's going to work right now. I'm less concerned with that just because I've been working on it with staff, but the 0.75, what we've seen in other areas is I think the local jurisdiction has to step in and deal with those problems
Right.
that may occur if they're underparked. And that can't be on the developer. We won't get it to happen.
No, we're not proposing the developers do parking.
Right,
management plans.
Right, or even providing additional public parking in areas where people could have a parking pass overnight. Because we do see that most people, at least in North Shore, no matter how much we've invested in transit, we don't have the type of shopping or facilities that people don't need to have a car to get to Costco or Home Depot or the major
Mhm.
big box stores. I wish it were not the case. I wish we had more shopping in our town centers. We don't. And so many of the people that are in the lower income brackets are going to need some sort of transport out of the region in order to
Correct.
do those, or their medical appointments, or, I mean,
Yep.
everything that we've lost on the North Shore. So we're very involved in that. And so I think the question is, how are the other local governments looking at this? And is that something that we should put more on the local governments to ensure participation in these sorts of programs? Because we don't want every developer doing their own thing with parking management or transit service. It'll
Mhm.
just be a nightmare. Nobody will know what's going on and you can't coordinate it. You do want it done seamlessly. To your point, I mean, each developer having a shuttle van is not gonna
No,
solve
we
our
aren't, we
VMT
aren't
issues.
recommending developers
Yeah.
do parking management or
Right.
even provide the transit.
Yeah,
And-
and I
and-
think what Shelley's asking is, should we require somebody, or I'm raising the question, should that be part of what local governments have to do to get these incentives?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to bring this slide back up is you starting at the left, you see where we are, what we can do working with local governments. You still only get to that, what's that percentage? 170 to 155. So that box to the right is local governments maybe do provide parking lots or parking garages. Local governments maybe build the stormwater infrastructure. Local governments maybe, or CTC provides the land. Maybe you provide subsidies to the housing builder, or maybe you provide income subsidies to the renters. You know, there's a whole plethora of other financial assistance that's going to be needed to get the developer to provide housing below that I keep looking at it, 155 to 170 level. So this is about as far as we can go changing our regulations. You're absolutely right. There's more that has to happen to go to those lower income levels.
I think what you can do is enter into some sort of agreement with local government that, you know, if we make these code amendments, which are fairly dramatic changes to our code, you know, that this is what we expect from local government. You know, I remember the Kings Beach project and removing on-street parking. You know, the first thing that occurred to people is, oh my God, they're going to be parking in all of the neighborhoods. You know, and so they developed a parking management plan. I think it was done by Placer County, but, you know, I think it needs to be, you know, obligatory that they partner with us. If they want to see this affordable housing built, then they need to accommodate some of the needs that are going to be created by some of the changes that we make in code. And I don't know how you accomplish that, you know, I mean, I would think some sort of memorandum of understanding perhaps with local government. I don't know, John could probably weigh in on what would be the most appropriate mechanism. Anyway.
Well, the MOU is a proven
Yeah,
factor in, you know, how we do our residential developments. And I certainly, as one local government your representative wouldn't disagree that having the local governments in an MOU to make sure they're maintaining, you know, I think it's our obligation to maintain the community's health and well-being by looking at those factors and
Again, this is phase 2 of the whole housing program designed to look at high density coverage. And
well, I
parking.
understand that, but we're just kind of giving you a preview of a future
Is
discussion.
Karen listening?
John.
Phase 3.
John, so I actually was going to go in the other direction and talk about pushing the requirement back down to 0. As long as a developer can show how they're going to park the expected needs. So if they're building a building for J1s, those people don't typically have cars. If they're building a building, I mean, we know 4% of our population in the lake does not have a car already. And, you know, we're talking, these represent about 25% of the new units. So it's a greater percentage than that. But there are a lot of people who do exist here without cars already. You know, for the two things that drive the price of units are the density and the amount of parking. Because as a developer, first of all, what you're selling is not a house, you're selling square footage. And you have to maximize that. And if you can only put a couple units on a place, then they're all huge. So we're getting rid of that. The next greatest driver of density is, as the staff knows, but a lot of the public probably doesn't, is parking. It's just geometrically hard to fit parking on a sloping, strange shaped lot or almost any lot. And it takes up more space than a unit. We don't have a parking shortage in the basin. We have 5 to 6 times as many spaces as we have cars. So we have a resource that's being underutilized that is is a lot of coverage and a lot of runoff already that we can reuse. So my feeling is allow it to go as low as possible. In this case, I would say 0. as long as the person can show that they're dealing with the cars. We do that, we're doing that on a project in San Diego where it's just not possible to park that many cars on the property and still have retail and everything else that's required. So we're leasing it from a garage that's underutilized. And I think it's not going to be many cases where it's possible, but if we want to get down to achievable housing to the lowest levels, we're going to have an intersection of a place in the basin that already has stormwater management systems that can park cars close by because there's an underutilized lot at a grocery store, and that has a place for excess snow coverage. And there's going to be a couple of those places where we could get some of these buildings at very low affordability levels with no subsidy. And so I don't think we should preclude that. It won't be the majority of projects, but I would hate for us to cancel something that could work when
Yeah.
it's not a problem. So
And I'm sorry, I kind of led us into this long discussion when we were just trying to answer questions. Sorry about that, but because I know you still
No,
have
it's
to
an
get the
important
public
one.
and all that.
I think that there needs to be, I don't know, Vince, I think 0.75, 3/4 of a parking space, per unit is a pretty low bar to cross. If they can demonstrate, now the caveat would be if they can demonstrate that and again, but this is going to add to the cost of their development. If the city or the county isn't acquiring the parking lot or parking adjacent to the development, the affordable housing development, then somebody's going to have to front that cost. And if that's going to add to the developer's, expense.
Yeah.
So I think, if they're capable of doing that, or if they can provide or persuade local government to make those arrangements to provide the parking necessary to meet that, that 3/4 of a parking space per unit, that's fine. But I mean, I just don't think it's realistic to assume that everybody occupying these buildings is not going to have a car.
they usually will get their parking somewhere. And I think one of the other things that I think we have to do is decouple the parking from the unit, which is another thing where if you want parking, you pay for it. And that's a lease.
No, that's fine.
That's a lease at another, that's
Sure.
what the developer does is they master lease a set of parking spaces at another facility. And then they charge tenants who want to use them.
But that makes it less affordable.
It makes it less affordable, but if you don't need a car, you don't have to pay. If you need a car, you've got to pay. And that's how we get it so that we can provide I mean, you can't provide the most affordable housing and have 2 parking spaces and, 4,000
Well-
square feet and access to a pool and a gym. And, we're talking
Yeah.
about, this is giving us the option to try to reach that lowest level of affordability that we can without subsidy. And I think it's going to be very few projects. I don't think it's going to be that many units that will qualify for this and be able to make it work. But I think it's a tier that then we can meet. And you're right, most of the units and most of the people are going to want to have at least a car per unit. And so this might not work for them, but
Yeah.
But-
Mr. Chairman,
But then you're
Yes.
foreclosing the right for them to occupy that building. That's my main concern.
I was just gonna, when we have a bunch of talk back and forth, it's hard for the general public sometimes to catch on. It's always best that we stop talking, identify ourselves, Mr. Chairman, and then move on. This is James Hittlemyer for the record. I had a couple questions if I could take this time to ask them. In that respect, the general average for commercial spaces is usually 1 parking space for 200 feet or 1 for 500 feet. The number varies across the board. How many times in Tahoe do we have situations where people take residential housing and then convert them to commercial activity? I ask that because in Douglas County, it's rather common. So I was just kind of curious, because if you create situations where you don't have any parking, and then later those establishments change to commercial, and then the county comes and says, well, no, you can't convert to commercial because now you don't have enough parking spots. You've already kind of created a problem there. So I was wondering, how often does that happen within the Tahoe Basin? Not at all. Or am I just dealing with my own situational
Well,
anecdotes?
it's, we just started allowing it about 5 years ago for people to convert one type of development right to another. So that situation is probably in around the range of about 50 units. We have seen it happen because they get before the development right exchange happened, but they always make sure they have parking.
If I could follow up with another question. in that
Wait,
respect.
one comment on that. These will be deed restricted affordable housing units
Yeah.
in perpetuity. So these
Okay.
can never be converted.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. With that, what is our lowest threshold right now, the minimum requirement of parking spots required right now for an establishment or a
We,
residence?
we do not have parking standards. TRPA has never, we left that to the local governments.
So if I could follow up, then right now we're at 0, which is where you want to be, and you're arguing we should go to 0.75?
No,
No, we're
right
at
now-
0.
No, we're not at 0. We don't have one.
Correct.
I know James is trying to ask about what is our current regulation. So we don't have a standard for that.
And if no standard exists, John Marshall is James Sotomayor again for the record. Am I right in assuming that if no standard exists, then it's 0?
No, then it's driven by what the local requirement is.
So if we, James Sotomayor again for the record, so if we establish one, then we are telling the counties this will become hereby the minimum. Do we potentially then know what the current laws are of the counties as far as that?
Yes,
If I could hear
we
that
do.
feedback?
we are, go ahead, Alyssa.
We do, off the top of my head, I don't know what they are for commercial specifically, but I do know what they are for residential, so I could. So they're between, I mean, it depends on the county, or the jurisdiction, but it's between 1 and 2 spaces per unit. And like in Washoe County and the city, it's, dependent on the unit size, so studio and 1 bedrooms require less parking than, a 2-bedroom plus. In Placer County, El Dorado, and Douglas counties, they require, 2 spaces per unit.
And to be clear, John Hester, to be clear, what we're recommending is not a minimum, but a maximum. So that if somebody's saying, I want 2 spaces for every residential unit, we're saying you can't require more than 0.75, but the developer can go beyond that if he or she wants to.
I greatly appreciate that explanation. It gives me a lot more comfort with the discussion, but it's also fascinating because I have also seen several times where the written rule would be 1, but a county might base their approval on more. I've seen situations where that does occur, so I appreciate the discussion. I tend to lean to the concept of how do you build 0.75 parking spots. I like the idea of 1 better just because, well, it's easy to build 1. Building 3/4 means you have to build 2 homes. So you get 1.5. Oh, wait, now you got to build 4 so you can get to the number of 3. So that's even. And that's where I get confused. Thank you.
It's just a math issue.
Well, Vince would tell you
Yeah.
0.
Yeah, I'd say
Mm.
zero is a lot easier and a lot more affordable. We might actually get some affordable housing if we go lower. And I think that's one thing that we need to look at because, the levers that we can control are height, density, coverage, parking, and then subsidies. And we all know how incredibly high the subsidies have been for affordable housing in the basin. We've approved $800,000 dorm rooms, single bedrooms. We've approved $500,000 for housing units in South Lake. Both of those came with free land. I mean, by free, I mean, that's another subsidy that was just put in by a different organization. So the costs are astronomical. And that's why I think we have to be really bold in pushing these things as far as we can for the couple hundred units that we've got and a smaller percentage that are even going to be able to make use of that change.
Mr. Chairman, after you all, this is kind of a process check, after you all finish questions of us and then get public comment, as you go through it, we'll record what we think changes could be. And we have a couple options that might deal with some of your issues, but probably at this point kind of remind.
Okay.
to do public
We need
comment
to
and
get
through
public
asking-
comment going. Any other board comments?
I
or committee
just,
comments?
this is Cindy Gustafson for the record. I wanted to go back to the slide on AMI. One of the things I've heard mostly from the public, quite a few letters that we've received both in my office as supervisor and also through TRPA, is the concern that the achievable numbers that we're talking about without having an upper limit are a challenge or are too high. And yet I have been told repeatedly that the lowest income levels don't exist here. Very few people are in those categories. We're paying too much for employees. At least on the North Shore, this is where we're at, that we don't have people that meet those categories where state and federal funding can subsidize their rents economically. So that's why we've come up with the more achievable and deed restriction programs. There's been concern expressed to me that, well, wow, then you've got doctors in, some of these deed restricted units. And I said, that's our hope in North Lake, is that doctors, nurses, public safety workers, teachers can live here. And many of those do make too much to qualify for those. So when you say that this is affordable at 80%, how many people in that family at 82,000? Because that's high from my understanding.
Yeah, so that's based on a 3-person household income.
Okay.
So a 1-person household would be lower than that.
Yeah, so if you're looking at studio apartments or 1-bedrooms for one person, the number would be lower. That's where I felt it looked high to me. And because I do think we have a lot of people in those income brackets, but I don't know that they have 3 people in their household. So, okay. And then my only other comment was I do want to strongly urge that if we look at, and I might go with 0 parking too, as long as there's an MOU or an agreement with the jurisdiction that they're addressing transit and parking management in the region, because I do think local governments have to step up and be part of the solution, or we won't have local employees here.
Thank you, Cindy. Any other questions from committee members? All right, then we'll go to public comment, which means I have to put on my glasses to read all this. Let's see. All right, if any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. I'd also like to ask that if people online who would like to speak could raise their hands, and people in person who would like to speak could kind of line up maybe in the front row or something like that. Then we'll just be able to manage our time a little bit better. All right, so in person, all right. Come and make sure to turn on the mic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Seth Dagab. I'm here representing myself, but I am COO of Next Gen Housing Partners, and my partners, investors, and I have built several workforce housing, affordable by design buildings in Metro Seattle that would work very well with most of these rules. So the main obstacle I see right now is construction financing has gone from 5% to 9%, and that makes it difficult. But aside from that aspect, a lot of what we did in Seattle would work in the Tahoe Basin with these rule changes. So I'm generally very supportive of them. Also want to generally say what Vince said. Vince has an excellent grasp of the cost drivers of multifamily housing, and what's been discussed here is very positive and productive. A few things on top of the written notes that I sent in, the compliance with deed restrictions. I sat here not an hour and a half ago where staff recommended streamlining some of the auditing of permits that cities offer because it took up so much staff time and so much TRPA money. The current proposal has that for every lease at every unit every time, and that is a tremendous burden on TRPA or the city or wherever it gets delegated to. It's also a tremendous burden on the developer. We have a full-time employee in Seattle that does nothing but communicate with the city on the 20% of units that we have that are deed restricted. So that's just a tremendous burden on both parties. And I'd encourage you to look at using sampling instead of 100% auditing on the deed restricted units. One thing, and my final comment is just some clarifications would be helpful, and perhaps it's somewhere buried in the code, but I haven't seen it on any of the webinars that I've been to at as far as the TRPA. One is there's a bit of a coordination mismatch between TRPA's efforts and at least the city of South Lake Tahoe's efforts, which is where I've spent most of my time here. City of South Lake Tahoe is pursuing area plan amendments that are similar, but not the same as TRPA. They are spending significant amount of time talking about parking specifically, but they also have a maximum density of 65 units per acre, whereas here it's unlimited. There are several other things where the themes are similar, but the details are different. And I don't know whose rules supersede whose. If you haven't tackled parking, but City of South Lake Tahoe has, I don't know how to plan for that. So some clarity would be good, or some coordination would be good there. And then also within the TRPA proposal, I'm unclear as to the bonus units. Is there if there are 900 bonus units, are some set aside for affordable, are some set aside for achievable, or some set aside for each bucket, or is there one bucket for all three? I haven't gotten any clarity on that. So I don't know if there's any further incentives to develop affordable versus achievable versus moderate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we had one more person in person.
Amelia Richmond, South Lake Tahoe resident and president of Locals for Affordable Housing. I understand that many members of our community are interested in maintaining the status quo and preserving neighborhoods. You may hear from some of them today. But with all due respect, many of these community members purchased their homes long ago, and housing is not a personal struggle for them. If we want to live a meaningful life on this earth, we cannot care only about the issues that impact us directly. We have to care about our neighbors and our community at large. Even if we personally have housing we can afford, we need to consider the tens of thousands of members of our community who are working multiple jobs, struggling to keep a roof over their heads, and find a way to raise families here. We need to acknowledge that local businesses are struggling to find employees, and local employees are desperately struggling to find and afford housing. We need to acknowledge that our population is declining, our school enrollment is declining, and more longtime locals are leaving the lake every day because they can no longer afford to live here. Further, for those concerned about preserving neighborhoods, I ask that they consider the current state of their neighborhoods they're fighting to preserve, how it feels to be surrounded by vacant homes used as second homes and short-term vacation rentals. For those concerned about preserving neighborhoods, I ask you to consider what you want. If you want to own a home in a community without local families and a local workforce, or you show up to your favorite coffee shop or restaurant to find them closed early due to lack of staffing, or firefighters responsible for protecting your home have to commute from an hour away. I ask that those who are concerned about preserving neighborhoods to consider the possibility that your voice here today is harming families and local businesses, to consider that we need to change how we develop housing in order to save our neighborhoods. I'm grateful, extremely grateful to the TRPA board and staff for their efforts to make housing more accessible and affordable, especially the work to increase density and remove parking minimums. Thank you. This work is so important. I do have one technical question, which is whether the housing amendments will include changes to comply with SB 9, California's bill allowing duplexes in single family zoning. I hope it's that they will. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Gavin. Right.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members and staff. Sorry to step out for a little bit today. Schedule got a little messed up as things dragged on. We did send in a letter yesterday, a little bit late. Hopefully you had a chance to read it. We kept it short. I just want to go over a few of the key points from that. So big thanks to Alyssa and Karen. They've been doing a lot of work with us directly and through the Tahoe Living Working Group. Feel like a lot of our concerns have been addressed over these, couple of years that this has been going on at this point. Coverage, we're getting a lot more comfortable with as it's written now, with the requirements that it's all these things only applying to deed restricted is of course key. But with the requirement that it's basically government monitored and managed area-wide treatment makes us a lot more comfortable. Height, we don't really see the need for the additional height, although, looking through the Cascadia and the pro formas and all that, some case can be made. As Ms. Aldina was discussing, maybe it's not by right, maybe it's a special use to get above a few more feet, but that's not the biggest issue for us. The two things remaining that we do want to see addressed and we're really close on, one is parking. Really good step in the right direction with the 0.75 per unit. There are, of course, going to be growing pains as we transition away from the car-centric culture and communities and built environment that we have. It's a chicken or the egg argument, transit and alternatives before limiting parking. I mean, you really need to do it in tandem, stepwise, and there are going to be some growing pains, but we'll all get used to it. And it is really, really important for almost all of our goals, including affordable housing here to limit parking. So we'd really like to see is no parking minimums for deed restricted housing. Let the developers decide. Usually those are not words that would come out of my mouth, let the developers decide. But in this case, we think it's very appropriate. And then the 0.75, a little unclear if it's a minimum or maximum. It's described as a minimum in the staff report, but the way the code is written kind of seems like a maximum. We'd prefer a maximum, but understanding that we're taking steps, a minimum would be okay. That 0.75, I think that would be appropriate for the multifamily and the bonus unit boundary area. And then the zero minimums within town centers is what we'd really like to see. And then the last piece is the adjacent parcels to town centers. There are a lot of thought and time went into those town center boundaries. And it's like, why do we have boundaries? We just start blurring them. So I'd rather see that go to phase 3 and take a more holistic look at, if you look at South Lake Tahoe, for example, there's like a block that's a town center and Sierra Tract here and there. So just expanding like every parcel around there might not make sense. So I'd like to see a more holistic approach in phase 3 to that one. Although the idea of transition zones very much support in theory, but those could be within like the edges of the town centers, within the town centers instead of outside of them. So parking, zero minimums in town centers, 0.75 outside, and punt the adjacent parcels to the next phase. And we're pretty happy with this as it is. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Anyone else in person? All right, then we'll go to online commenters. So,
Mr. Chair, we have 5 hands raised online.
okay, great.
Sorry, it's going up. We have 8 hands raised online. The first hand raised was Ann Nichols. And if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi there, good afternoon. Regarding the flash vote, it was so vague and undescriptive that it was like asking you, do you want to eat if you're hungry? It was like, do you mind height if there's affordable housing? It didn't say how much height, how much parking, how much coverage. It was really, really unfair and unrepresentative. And how would the person taking it know? And thank you, Shelley, for having actual, skepticism and discussion. Vince, I wasn't discouraged once again by your cheerleading and by you calling those of us that speak up the minority. Once again, we have 3,000 views on our video. We have 800 and almost 900 signatures on our petition about figuring out a carrying capacity. We have 800 on our mailing list. I mean, this is not nothing. This is some people that count. So Vince, I know you've done a lot of developing in Southern California and San Diego, and you're very familiar. Oh, and by the way, John Hester, we can't hear you. It's like you're mumbling and you're very soft spoken, but it's hard to hear when you're online. So there is so much, where do you start? No parking. It's like magical thinking, that these people, the people you supposedly want to help. I mean, even doctors need nursing assistants. They need people to clean up the floors. I know you want doctors, Cindy, but really we need to help these other people. They are the people that really can't afford it. And achievable housing is not affordable at all. And we're going to get you all those numbers because I guess you're not looking at that. And, the parking, they need cars to go to work. I mean, this is ideologue. kind of stuff. And it's not real, we don't have a good system of transportation, headway times. We don't, and the TARP Connect, that costs $16 per ride. And you guys want us, the public, to pay for it. So really, is that a good solution? I mean, this is so shocking. Parking to zero. I mean, I can't, and Gavin, so disappointed in the league. It's just sad. But anyway, thank you. Good luck, guys.
Thank you, Ann. Next.
The next hand raised is Judith Tornese. Judith, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Judith Tornese. I'm president of Friends of the West Shore. Friends has submitted a comment letter on the proposed code amendments. These are very significant amendments. TRPA has the responsibility to protect the lake and its residents and visitors. As such, it's important to review the environmental impacts of these amendments, especially as respects wildfire emergency evacuation, traffic congestion, scenic views, parking, cumulative impacts, and other environmental impacts. Therefore, it's crucial that a new environmental report be issued to identify, analyze, and mitigate these impacts. Also, TRPA would need to meet CEQA's requirements, which require an updated analysis when there is significant new information or changes since the previous analysis. Also, I would like someone to explain how the TRPA housing amendments will interact with the proposed amendments under the Placer Tahoe Basin Area Plan. If the Placer amendments are less restrictive and broader than TRPA amendments, can Placer expand and apply their amendments in addition to whatever TRPA amendments say? In other words, which rules and jurisdictions supersede and are applicable? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judith.
Next hand raised is Nick Spiel. Nick, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, my name is Nick Spiel and I live in South Lake Tahoe. I just wanted to say thank you for all of your hard work on this project. The housing crisis is devastating our community, and the TRPA needs to act with urgency to enable more affordable housing development. I'm on the Planning Commission for the City of South Lake Tahoe, and I'll say that I'm speaking for myself only. But I've seen how the strict restrictions requiring sparse housing development have stymied affordable housing and led to a dynamic where the only housing that the private sector builds are large second homes that locals can't afford. I'm also passionate about transit and what we can do to push mode share away from cars to enable more people to take the bus. And one of the big problems in South Lake Tahoe is that too many people live too far from a bus stop for transit to be viable for them. By enabling greater density and building heights in our town centers, more people will be able to live closer to the bus stop, closer to their jobs. They will be able to live more sustainably. This will also help prevent further sprawl of mansion development into sensitive forest lands and keep our development in the town centers. Some might not like the aesthetic of taller buildings, but they'll appreciate the maintenance of open space on the outskirts of town. Finally, I appreciate the reduction of the burden of minimum parking requirements that forces developers to construct more parking spaces than they would feel otherwise, or how they would choose otherwise. I encourage the TRPA to eliminate these requirements altogether. Most projects would still end up building parking, most people build cars, but please don't forget that many of the poorest in our community don't have a car already. And right now, local governments are forcing them to pay to rent a parking spot, even if it sits empty. Myself, I don't have a car, but I do have a parking spot. I'm forced to pay for it because the government insists that I need a car. I would love to rent an apartment without a parking spot. It would probably be cheaper and closer to transit. If you would let me rent an apartment by the bus stop, I would really appreciate it. Finally, I'd like to thank the staff for their hard work here and recommend that the committee move forward with the proposal. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick.
The next hand raised is Christina Hill. Christina, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, thank you very much. This is Christina Hill, and I'm a former TRPA employee and a 40-year environmental planner in Tahoe. I think that this is really a problem that was created by TRPA by designating short-term rentals as a residential use, when in fact they're an income-based use that is more like a hotel, a mini hotel, and they're encroached in our neighborhoods and taken up. Can you hear me?
Yes. we can hear
Okay,
you.
they've taken up all the housing in my neighborhood, and the owners don't even live in Tahoe. And they used to be long-term rentals that were rented for ski instructors and lift operators and, you know, other workforce housing, and now they're gone. And it's unbelievable to me that you're going to do an environmental checklist for this environmental evaluation, when really you should, this is huge. You should be doing an environmental impact report, EIS, and you know, unlimited density, height up to 65 feet, no parking requirements. I just don't understand it. And it, you know, as a planner, it seems ludicrous. And I can't believe you're even considering it when the environmental impacts have not even been evaluated. You know, I guess they're coming out in October, the environmental checklist. Well, they'll just say no, 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 no. You know, it's not, the TRPA was directed in the compact to establish environmental threshold carrying capacities and adopt and enforce regional plan and implementing ordinances which will achieve and maintain such capacities while providing for orderly growth and development consistent with such capacities. You know, there's no consideration of the environment in this. And I'm glad Shelley brought up the height issue, because as demonstrated when we talked about this in like Kings Beach, 65 feet height will make all those roads that go east and west completely shaded and ice rinks with this tall building height. So it's creating unsafe conditions, and it's not good. And I don't see how people are going to get around in the winter months on these bike paths or sidewalks, you know, when it snows 30 feet in the winter these days. So I'm kind of asking you to stay away from the affordable housing concept of this, because it's not affordable to our local workers who work at the ski areas and the beaches in the summer. And you know, if this is approved, it will change the character of our communities and the health of our environment forever. Thank you.
Christina.
Next hand raised is Amanda Johnson. Amanda, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amanda Johnson. I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the state of California. And I just want to say that we generally support the amendments here. Affordable housing is desperately needed in the basin. And we are definitely supportive of the chairman's proposal to not include a minimum parking requirement. I think we are receptive to concerns about continuing this proposal on an environmental checklist. However, we think that the broader impacts will likely be, I don't say mitigated, but encompassed with the general program guidelines, I think it would be really helpful to understand exactly what the definition is going to be for a mixed use structure. I could see that becoming a loophole for allowing commercial development under these new standards. And I would think it would be helpful to know exactly where all the sewer and stormwater catch basins are, so we can see the extent of where these changes will take effect in the near term without a larger municipal development. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Next hand raised is Leah Kaufman. Leah, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say that just like Christina Hill, I am a land use planner in the Tahoe Basin. I started my career at TRPA and I have 40 years experience. I've been looking at the details and it's all in the details. So while a triplex, a duplex, an ADU, a JADU, a tiny home has a very different impact, when you allow unbridled density and extra height in every area on the North Shore that extends from Incline Village to Tahoma, you're talking about hundreds of parcels. You're talking about the Kings Beach grid. You're talking about Tahoma residential. You're talking about 2 miles of Tahoe Vista. So TRPA's examples were used on 12,000 square foot lots, but what we have are 2, 3, 4, and 5 acres in many of these areas. And there are no checklists. And I don't know if the AG would be happy about seeing 5-acre parcels with this same type of density, height, coverage. And in our community of Placer, 35 people spent 4 years crafting height amendments. And I think Cindy, our supervisor, knows that it is a majority of people that aren't happy about heights more than the 56 feet that were approved, fought over, and agreed upon. And TRPA has not done any proposals showing heights that fit and conform within the guidelines of 56 feet. The 56 feet could be on more than a 12,000 square foot lot. So I have been repeatedly asking for developers to take a look at that. TRPA, like Christina says, they did not ever make STRs as TAUs, and that was a big mistake. Those impact our neighborhoods. The vacant lots, the vacant houses impact our neighborhoods. I've read a lot of studies that say if we had less STRs, 10 to 15% would go back into long-term rental. 3,900 STRs in Placer County alone would free up 600 to 800 housing units. So if we have 960 bonus units area-wide, we can get 800 more long-term rentals that would actually accommodate families just by limiting STRs. So I just wanted to reiterate that I'm 100% in agreement with Christina, and I think that in our community, I think we are pretty much united that we don't want to see 65 foot of height. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Next hand raised is Pamela Sigdinos. Pamela, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, I'd like to refrain again. I'd like to really underscore if TRPA wants to support workers and our communities immediately, cap short-term rentals basin-wide. Now, let me turn to another point. If going bold with these amendments means putting lives in danger, then sadly, you have succeeded wildly. After Lahaina's tragedy, it's downright chilling that TRPA persists with a single-minded focus to pack more building density and more people into our already visitor-overwhelmed basin. I say this with no hyperbole. This plan, tailored for developers and investors, sets the table for another Paradise or Lahaina tragedy where many simply cannot escape. I attended Washoe County's evacuation exercise, the one calling for a small group of inclined residents to shelter at the rec center a mile away. Rather than instilling confidence, this exercise filled me with dread as it simulated nothing resembling a real-life evacuation. The difference between previous tragedies and today is you have greater public safety knowledge and lessons at your fingertips. TRPA possesses authority to establish responsible land use rules that protect, not endanger. It makes no sense to increase building density and population when experts, including those on your board, admit Tahoe lacks reliable integrated systems to ensure the safety of those already in the basin. Lastly, to understand why public trust in TRPA has eroded so badly, it doesn't help that all the slides you've shown today and your website renderings don't adequately reflect reality. Where are the 10 and 20-foot snowbanks we endured months on end this past year, blocking bus stop access and multi-use paths? If the latest community poll responses are any indication, and please read the comments, not just the 3-question answer, your presentation has succeeded in unifying public sentiment against this ill-conceived plan. No visitor, worker, or resident supports manufactured gridlock or threats to public safety. In short, Tahoe's infrastructure and environment cannot support these amendments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pamela.
Mr. Chair, we have 3 more hands raised. The next hand up is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Doug Flaherty, President of TahoeCleanAir.org. A new or supplemental EIS to the 2012 regional plan must be prepared, circulated, and certified in accordance with these rules, your own rules, in the same manner as a draft EIS. TRPA must require preparation, circulation, and certification of either a new EIS or a supplemental EIS to the 2012 regional plan. Any reasonable person would conclude that these far-reaching proposed amendments may have a significant effect on the environment and public safety, especially within dense town centers and multi-use areas. This based on a cumulatively significant number of amendments, past projects, new information, recent safety and pollution events, and continuing degradation of Lake Tahoe since the 2012 regional plan adoption. In the interest of prudent life safety wildfire evacuation planning, the TRPA must utilize the best available California Attorney General best practices for analyzing and mitigating wildfire impacts of development projects when it comes to evacuation planning. This includes the prudent development of a variety of concentrated town center and mixed-use planning scenarios to help inform planners, the public, and emergency responders regarding potential options during a wildfire evacuation, including identification of significant impacts within the amendments that your amendments will have on wildfire evacuation. This includes a complete roadway by roadway wildfire evacuation capacity evaluation using modern data collection tools. Really, an initial environmental checklist, you've got to be kidding me. You're endangering the lives of these even more to come, dense town centers, proven today to be evacuation choke points, basically that's going to have vehicles and foot traffic competing in a sudden surge, impacting already overcapacity evacuation roadways, thereby further and significantly impacting the current evacuation assumptions and timing, which are almost non-existent. Please read the body cam, or please take a look at the body cam link for the evacuation from Paradise. And that's in my written comments and electronically. And please take a look at the list of photos and descriptions of where all the senior citizens and the folks died, all 80 some odd, 82, 83 people, where they died in their homes because they didn't have a car, where they died because they were walking, and where they died because of evacuation choke points. I'm not sure why you guys are pursuing this. It's unsafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Next hand raised is Melissa Soderston. Melissa, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that I am very excited about this plan. I think staff did a wonderful job. And I am one of those people that does not own a car by choice. I walk all around town, don't even own a bike. I think that these plans will incentivize our communities to improve our evacuation routes. It allows us to build new updated construction within our town centers that allow, the people that live here and would like to stay here to have affordable housing. We really need to stick to the affordable housing aspect of all of that. We could build these new buildings with complete updated Firewise practices rather than logging the forest. That's what we need to be doing. So I think everything about this plan sets us up in a wonderful position for the future. It will help us achieve grant funding for transportation if we leave out the requirement for parking spaces. I think leaving that at 0 and allowing the developer to make the choice on their own is a wonderful addition to this plan. Cars are not necessary, and the less of us that drive our cars, the more we can push for decent public transportation, evacuation routes. All that can be planned into these things. I think a lot of the problems that people have with this plan, the building height, the evacuation routes, all of that would have been solved had any of our communities been built in the first place with a master plan. And I think that this master plan here, the regional plan, area plan, really makes up for some of those deficiencies and brings us into where we need to be for the future. There's no doubt that we have a housing issue here that's not going to be solved simply by removing those vacation rentals and stuff that are still in our neighborhoods. That's a start, but we really need these larger buildings in our town centers without the focus on cars. That's where we want to be for the climate, for our climate goals, for the future, for our low income community members, which is the vast majority. Unfortunately, most of them are working and do not have the time to attend these meetings. They're never held on the weekends. They're never held more than one time. Those also should be things that are changed so that everyone in our community has a chance to attend and use their voice to speak up for themselves, because I think a lot of the people here are not affected by the housing issues. I myself am not. I own my own home. I'm very lucky to do that. But we need to think about everyone in our community and not just about the aesthetic of what we hope that our neighborhood will stay in the 1960s. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
2 more. The next hand raised is Sophia Heydrich. Sophia, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on the proposed housing code amendments before you today. My name is Sophia Heydrich, and I am the Advocacy Director for Mountain Area Preservation. We understand where the proposed amendments are coming from and agree that there is a critical need for housing to support the folks who fuel our community, the workforce. That being said, these are dramatic proposals and they are concerning for a variety of reasons, especially in the transition and multifamily zones adjacent to town centers. First, the additional height raises serious concerns about degradation of viewsheds and community character, as well as increased safety risks related to shading of adjacent roads and buildings. Second, it is concerning that you are contemplating establishing a parking requirement that is less than 1 space per unit without having parking management plans already in place. As has been mentioned, most people need to drive, and most units will have at least one associated car. There is discussion of future parking management plans being developed by the local jurisdictions. This is just putting the cart before the horse. Those plans should be in place before these parking requirements are even considered. Third, the amendments related to density and massing would concentrate more people in a smaller geographic area. Wildfire risks are growing with each passing year, and wildfire evacuation is a critical concern. Before moving forward on amendments like these, we really need to understand how the amendments will impact wildfire evacuation and how the increased risks will be mitigated. Full environmental review under CEQA needs to be completed. Finally, staff mentioned during the presentation that other mountain towns are already doing these things and they're working in those communities. It would be really helpful to know what other mountain towns are doing these things and how they're working. This is a unique community, and what works in other places can't always be applied here. Please provide examples during future presentations. Thank you for considering these comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The last hand raised is Erin Casey. Erin, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yes, hi. I hope you can hear me. My name is Erin Casey, and I work very closely with several organizations on the North Shore, including the North Tahoe Community Alliance, as well as a workforce housing agency that is, or organization, I should say, that is soon to be launched in our community. I have lived in our community for over 20 years, as well as worked here, and I'm deeply committed to its well-being, its prosperity, and sustainability. I'm here today to express my support for the proposed amendments and for the staff work that's gone into this as well. It's very much appreciated in attempting to respond to the dire needs that we have in our community to provide housing. The proposed height and density adjustments for deed restricted properties serve a dual purpose. They not only optimize land use in our town centers, but also ensure that the heart of our community, its educators, healthcare workers, service industry professionals, and others have access to homes and housing. I also want to mention that we also have to remember that addressing our housing needs is not a singular path, but a multifaceted approach. I have heard other references today to things like short-term rentals and potential challenges that some believe, and in some cases may have impacted housing. And I do believe that many of our jurisdictions and partners are addressing those challenges through other methods and other policy adjustments. These proposed code changes represent just one strategy among many, and I believe that their impact could be substantial in our community. The other thing I do want to mention is that when we talk about the addition of workforce housing in our community, particularly in the basin, there seems to be this assumption that that is going to increase the number of individuals living in our communities, thereby increasing traffic and congestion. But one thing I want to point out is if you look at many of the housing studies in our region, there are a number of individuals who are living in our community already, but are in inadequate housing. And I will say that I was one of those people managing a family with a small child, living in a home with a landlord who was not operating in an appropriate manner when it came to providing us with the right support as tenants. So this is not only the opportunity to provide housing to those that may be commuting in, but also to ensure they have appropriate housing for themselves and their families. And I think that's important to note. I also want to mention that there is significant investment happening in the North Shore around transportation to address some of the comments I have heard on parking. So in closing, thank you to your staff. Thank you for taking my comments and for considering these changes that I am in support of.
Thank you. We have one more online.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Toby Tyler, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Yeah, this is Toby Tyler with the Sierra Club Tahoe Area Group. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm here to express opposition to the proposed changes without thorough environmental analysis beyond the checklist. I just want to echo the previous statements by Judith Tornese with Friends of West Shore, Sophia Heydrich with Mountain Area Preservation, Doug Flaherty, Christina Hill, Leah Kaufman, and others who have expressed opposition. My comments are similar to theirs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That it online?
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll close public comment. I did get an email, Brendan Ferry, who chairs our Tahoe Living Working Group, sent me an email. He had to run off to a hearing. So he asked me if I could read his email. I have not actually read it. I have to get my glasses to work to read this, but so I'll read that now. Let's see. Generally, El Dorado County is supportive of the proposed height, density, and coverage standards, and we applaud TRPA for continuing to work to address affordable and workforce housing issues in the basin. These amendments can help the county meet its regional housing needs assessment, the RHNA requirements from the state. And now a few specifics. The proposed water quality language looks better, but we still have some concerns about the statement like county owned and or operate. I'm assuming the stormwater management system. In all likelihood, we will not own and or operate EMPs for private development. On parking, we suggest bringing down the minimum standard from 1.5 per unit to 1 per unit with an option to add in some additional ratio of guest spots. On mixed use, do these standards only apply for projects in the same building, or could the housing component be built off-site? Also, there is no ratio of housing that is required. Could this lead to more 947 type projects? Thank you again for your assistance, Brendan Ferry. All right, so that concludes our public comments. So we'll go to committee member discussion.
I had a couple, this is Cindy Gustafson. I had a couple of follow-ups from the public comment. Can we put up the map where the amendments apply to? There was a comment that it was going to extend all the way down the West Shore, and I could be wrong. I thought Tahoe City was the furthest south that we went, but I'm not sure about the multifamily. So there's the town center in Tahoe City on the left. And then the multifamily.
I think there is multifamily in Homewood. A little stretch. I know that because it's adjacent to my house.
While you do that, I just want to make sure that we look at the limitations on the areas and be very clear with the public about that. Because I agree, we don't want to see this. I mean, it defeats the purpose to have these amendments apply all the way around the lake. They need to be limited in town centers if we're even going to consider that. There was also a comment about which rules apply. From my understanding, the most restrictive rules by any agency apply. So if the local government is more restrictive than TRPA, the local government rules would apply. If TRPA is more restrictive, TRPA's rules would apply. Am I correct on that?
You're correct.
Thank
These,
Yeah.
would you like,
Yeah,
can I
keep
elaborate
going.
just a
Yeah.
second? With these rules, though, it may not be always clear what is the more restrictive.
Okay.
So for example, with parking requirements, the lower number is the more restrictive number than, as you go downwards. But in density, it's probably the opposite way, where it's more restrictive. The TRPA rule would essentially preempt any inconsistent local law. It's not necessarily restrictive, but whether or not the TRPA rule is being accomplished. So at density, it would be the other way. It would effectively be a floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
That brings up a question though. It says local jurisdictions may propose height and density allowances below what is permitted in sections A and B above, if they demonstrate that the alternative standards will facilitate the construction of sufficient affordable workforce housing. So it's not in other words, it's something if the local jurisdictions can provide sufficient affordable housing without using these increased densities and increased heights, then they are permitted to do so. That's my interpretation of what's being.
Correct. That's, I mean, we were just talking theoretically about
Oh, I understand in general.
in general,
Yeah,
but
okay.
that's an out that say, you know, these minimums or maximums don't apply if you could present an alternative mechanism to accomplish the same thing, which is the affordable housing.
So then I have a question. What constitutes sufficient?
John or Alyssa, yeah.
If they can show that you can generate the same number at the same price with a different set of rules, that's fine. What we, and I want to answer that Seth's question from Seattle. We've been in very close contact with the city of South Lake Tahoe, and they said, we think there's a little bit different way we can achieve the same thing. So so we've allowed for them to substitute an alternative set of standards.
But John, we haven't allocated a specific number of bonus units to South Lake Tahoe, a specific number to the various other jurisdictions. So it's like comparing apples and oranges. I mean, what is the bar for these local jurisdictions when we don't know, you know, how many units can be reasonably developed within their jurisdiction?
What we are contemplating, we haven't put a numerical standard in yet. And I don't know if we'll need to, but the number we have been contemplating is 10% because the need numbers, I guess, weren't in the presentation today, but they've been in other presentations.
10% of the housing stock, existing housing stock?
10% of the new units have to be accommodated. 10% of the population of that jurisdiction is what I'm trying to say. How am I trying to say this?
10% of the total units.
We have
in
a
that area.
50,000 units in the basin and we need 5,000 affordable. Those
Right.
are rough numbers. I don't remember the exact numbers. So we're saying that 10% of they need to accommodate 10% of their housing stock needs to accommodate.
That's what I said, 10%
Okay,
based on their existing
Yeah,
housing stock.
yeah.
Okay.
Plus, go ahead.
I would also just add that the bar is what is shown in the Cascadia analysis that we've used as sort of a baseline for this proposal. In that we've showed that these changes can get down to, the 100 to 70% area median income level. So if the local jurisdictions want to come in and reduce those heights, for example, they could do that. But they would also need to show that they're providing, say, a direct subsidy coming from, an inclusionary housing requirement, for example, that would be going to a dedicated housing fund that could sort of fill that gap.
So Alyssa, some of the comments made by people concerned not just putting all of our eggs in one basket, but looking at alternative ways of generating. I know we've been doing this for a long time, affordable housing. And I really think, I know we've talked about this in the past, but I really think major employers, they're helping to create this problem, but they're not doing much to solve it. I mean, that's the bottom line, and I think that there should be some way, if they make an application to expand their footprint or their operation, they have to provide a certain number of workforce housing units on-site or off-site, a reasonable distance from their place of business. I think that's imperative. And in addition to that, I really think we need to increase the local jurisdictions need to increase the licensing fees for short-term rentals and use the revenue to subsidize rents for property owners who would like to convert their STRs to workforce housing. I mean, I think they want to look at a variety of other methods besides increasing density, increasing height, eliminating parking. I mean, and I really think this needs to be kind of multifaceted. And I would hope that we would look at these other alternatives so that we're not relying, solely on one solution.
We totally agree. That's why we wrote in the option. John Hester for the record. Hope people can hear me now. That's exactly why we wrote in the alternative for them to present a different program. For example, on the North Shore, there's a joint powers agreement of the airport, the school district, I can't remember all of them.
Hospital district, PUDs.
And they are building
County.
counties in it. So that's one tool. Inclusionary is another tool. The housing mitigation fee, if they wanted to do that, you can go, there's a whole laundry list. And we want to see people put together the best package they can. If they don't put one together, this is what you get. That's kind of our thought process.
And this is just the first piece. I mean, this is
Yeah.
not the only approach. It's just one piece, and this is the one that we're tackling first, but there's a lot of other policies that need to come forward to meet all the different levels of need.
And I
around the
think,
lake.
this is Cindy Gustafson for the record. I can just, again, speak for Placer County. Everything that Shelley just said, we're doing. Major employers are investing significant dollars into acquiring properties and converting it. Millions have been spent through a T-bid, which the businesses assess themselves. And they're putting that money and dedicated it to transportation and housing solutions, as well as the TOT money coming from the short-term rentals. And I just can't say enough about the real issue here is the price of second homes. When people, when people today sell their home, and it's probably one of their largest investments in their portfolios, they sell it for the highest price they can. And that's just outpriced all of our locals. I've watched time and time again, my neighbors retire and move out of the area, and they don't sell to a local, they sell to a second homeowner. And now we have either a vacation home, that sits empty, or, certainly isn't affordable. So we're trying to pursue all the options Shelley mentioned. I can't speak for the other jurisdictions. We have a lease to locals program that we just put, I think, another 500,000 into. In a temporary manner, because the amount of money we're spending buying down rents and giving incentives to people to rent their house long-term could better be spent putting into investments on permanent solutions, because we're just doing that until we can get something built on the North Shore. And I realize my earlier comments on parking and cars were more directed at our situation on North Shore. You have much more shopping and availability of services right here in a more compact area at South Lake Tahoe, even though I never think of South Tahoe as being compact as I drive through it. But certainly it's much more accessible. You don't have to leave the mountain to get to an area. So I take back my comments I made earlier on parking, because I heard great comments from the league and the AG's office on supporting that concept. But were you able to get that map that I was asking about? Because I wanted to go back to.
Yeah. So there is a small portion of Homewood that allows for multifamily. So that would apply there, as well as Tahoma.
Okay, and you just can't pull it up on the screen, but it's, okay. When you say small, there was also comments made that there's all these acreages of property that are vacant out there where this could apply. And I'm cognizant that's what the community is hearing and feeling. And I want to understand how large these areas are that this might apply to. And I'm sorry, yeah. Oh, that's better. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, I have better long distance vision. And that's the multifamily area.
The multifamily.
That's not town center, because we didn't have any other town centers except Kings Beach and Tahoe City. Okay.
And you can zoom out.
Okay. And then most of Tahoma is in El Dorado County, so I'm less familiar with where that line is through there. And then one other question I had that I didn't finish up on was the 100% deed restriction in order to get this. I think the other fear I've heard is that these will somehow be converted, that developers will come in and say one thing and then convert, or have a mixed development project that will end up being higher end condos. And so can you point me to that section again on the 100%? I know I read it last night, but I missed it now.
Yeah.
I'm going back.
No, that's a great clarification. So our proposal that we presented today applies to only 100% deed restricted developments. And we do compliance on those units annually. We just hired a third-party consultant to help us do compliance. And to answer one of the public comments that we got, we don't, you know, in that RFP, we audit 10% of the total deed restricted units. So we'll ask for pay stubs showing where people work, or, you know, pay stubs showing their income limits. We don't audit 100% of them because, as he noted, that is very time intensive for both TRPA and the property owners, but we do audit 10%. And then in terms of, you know, these incentives potentially being applied to like mixed income developments. So we do, that is part of the proposal, is to allow local jurisdictions through an area plan amendment to come in and change some of these standards. And like the city, for example, which another, you know, someone in public comment did bring up, they are looking at increasing their density from market rate to 65 units per acre. They are also looking at an inclusionary housing requirement. So within, you know, any new development that comes forward would have to be providing a certain percentage would need to be deed restricted. So we feel that there are, you know, opportunities to get deed restricted housing through market rate, and it's really on a case by case basis for the jurisdiction. So we are allowing them to come back to TRPA through an area plan amendment process and put in different standards that kind of fit the needs of their community.
Well, I wanted, on the deed restriction, while TRPA may only audit a certain number, I know it's critical to our investment in public dollars from the local jurisdiction that we're auditing 100%. In other words, every year they have to show their local employment in order to continue to have that. And we copied Vail, Colorado's program for that it had to be an annual, and it was 100%. It wasn't, you know, an audit. So I
clarify. We've copied Vail's too, and we're getting 100% reporting, but we're auditing 10%.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
I wanted to make sure that was clear, because for at least for Placer County, when we're applying those, we're very sensitive. We're not gonna, we know people can work around the system, and we've got to ask for 100%. Okay, thank you.
Clarify one other thing, John Hester. Julie and I have a regular meeting with the City of South Lake Tahoe manager and new assistant manager. And one of the things they explicitly asked is, we are working our program, which has some of the features Alyssa just described, and we would like to request respectfully that what you're proposing has an option for us to come up with something that does the same thing, but with a different mix. So that's a real life example of how this could happen.
What'd you say, John? You need to repeat that. I didn't hear it.
The city manager and assistant city manager in South Lake Tahoe, who Julie and I meet with regularly, told us they were coming up with a different package to get to affordable housing, the same things that we're trying to get to, but they'd like us to reserve a place in our proposed code amendments that you're hearing today, so that they can present an alternative way to get there. So in other words, ours is the default if you don't present an alternative, but they would like to present an alternative. Could you hear that?
Got it. Thank you.
So sorry, Alexis, I forgot about you back there on the screen.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. I have something.
Great.
I just want to say thank you to the staff. I know they've been working really hard on this, and I really appreciate the flash vote to get some consensus and understanding from the community. And that's something we asked for in the Living Working Group to really do some outreach. And so the additional workshops are very helpful. And I think for a county like mine, who's just starting to embark into programs like this and looking at changing our area plan amendment, this is a very helpful guide. I'm aligned with the chairman of also dropping the parking standard to 0, but I'll go with what the board wants to see today. And I will say that, you know, we as well at Washoe County have been working on a contract with Placemate that hopefully will be going into place soon, and we have upped our STR fees as well. So we are working, you know, diligently on these things. We even looked at a cap, but sadly, it did not pass by my board. So the local jurisdictions are also looking at many, many different pieces. And I'll tell you, with all of the new large employers coming online in my district, they are looking for ways to build housing. And this is a opportunity for them because they want to house their workers. They want professionals that they can rely on that will stay with them for years. And so hearing from many constituents, many who are seniors who cannot stay in our community, and all of their friends live in Incline, and sadly they can't stay there anymore and have had to move to Carson or Reno. I think that this is something we need to move forward with. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Sure.
One more thought. I think I shared this with John before, John Hester. Given the declining number of residential units that remain, I really think we need to examine whether or not we should permit the importation of coverage onto single family lots. These are buildable lots, so they're probably at 30%. One of the problems, being able to import coverage, additional coverage, is one of the things that drives these larger homes, the ability of the owner to build these larger homes. And in most cases, these larger homes are not going to be used as, are not going to be used, obviously, as affordable housing. And they're probably not going to be used as STRs either. If I build a multi-million-dollar home, I'm probably not going to rent it out to someone. But if they're building more modest homes, it may even attract investors, who are willing to build these homes and specifically make them available to local workforce members. I mean, we've been allowing the importation of coverage for some time, but I don't know that, as I say, given the diminishing number of residential lots, whether or not it's appropriate to continue doing that.
Thank you. Before we stop, was there anything else that you guys heard that you'd like to respond to from the public?
Yeah, there's just a couple things. Someone asked about the buckets for our bonus units and the categories, and we do have in our code that half of the 1,400 bonus units that we had as of 2018 would go towards the affordable income category, and then half would go towards the moderate and achievable income category. We did amend our code a couple years ago to allow for the moderate and achievable category to pull from the affordable, or no, vice versa. Sorry, exactly. Yeah, that we were seeing a large demand for affordable units. So we amended code to allow for them to pull from those higher income pools. And then there was another question about whether SB 9 would apply to this proposal. And it would not. We're not proposing any changes to neighborhoods that only allow single family right now. It's just to those areas that already allow for multifamily housing. And then the last was just clarification on the parking. So this would be requiring that the local jurisdictions cannot require more than 0.75 spaces per unit on average. So as I mentioned earlier, for example, if they require 2 spaces per unit right now, we would be reducing that requirement down to no more than 0.75, but the developer could provide more than 0.75 on average. I think that was it.
Great, thank you.
There is one other, and I don't know if Karen's prepared to speak on this, but she sent me guidance from the California Attorney General on CEQA work where you have high probability of wildland fires. And I'm going to paraphrase Karen's paraphrase, so correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but basically putting more dense housing concentrated on evacuation routes is one of the strategies they recommend that you do in California when you look at it from that perspective when you're doing a CEQA analysis. So I think somebody made a comment that that's the way you should do things, and that's precisely what this does.
Thank you. So if there's no other comment, do you want to kind of, this is informational, but we are trying to give staff direction for what to proceed with. So do you want to tell us what you think you heard from us, and we can
I'll do that.
see if we agree?
This is John Hester again. I think we heard from you everything we've proposed, except there's one question mark. We're not sure whether to proceed with 0 or 0.75. And Julie would like to add some comments.
Yep. Thank you for cutting to the chase, Mr. Chair. That was what I wanted to just get some more direct, just again, Julie Reagan, just to clarify the question. And I think Director Seldemeyer elucidated this point. You know, TRPA has really not, from a policy standpoint, not been involved. We've just been deferring to the local jurisdictions. And that's the policy shift here. And so we initially were at 1.5, and based on conversations of this committee in the past, and Shelley, some of the good questions that you asked about accessibility, handicap spaces, we did a lot of research and that, and a lot of back and forth. And the chicken and egg problem of we don't have 100% transit service today, but we'll never get there unless we start, you know, really pushing some of these policies forward, and more transit will be coming in the future. So that is how we arrived at the 0.75, but it's certainly up to this committee to give us direction on how you want us to roll this into the full APC and board recommendation. So I think we have enough direction on the other elements, with the exception maybe of the height, right? Or are we just gonna think we're good on that? Okay, very good.
Could I take the league's proposal as a starting point for discussion, which is 0 in core if you can show how you're going to meet your parking need, and 0.75 in the multifamily zone? Because I know the parking is a big concern because it drives so much of coverage, and you just have these lots that covered with cars. And reduces the affordability. So I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but I'm throwing it out there as an opening salvo in what might be another battle.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, James Seldemeyer for the record. I understand the concept of stating that if you can demonstrate, you could actually go to 0. I think that's a good concept. Again, they have to substantially demonstrate that they can get away with that. But I still have a concept of how to build 0.75 parking spots. So I would be remiss without going to at least 1.
I think what we would do probably, I mean, because it's for when you have a couple units, and we would have to define the rounding. We round up or down.
It's a practical question. What we do, I think, board member Seldemeyer and I actually talked about this one evening at the event center, but we probably are talking about multiple units. So it's probably like you said, you're going to be at 4 units, you build 3. But our rounding error would be that if it's over 0.5, 1.
Yeah. So.
And Mr. Chair,
What
on
would you
page
like to do?
293 of your packet, because if you didn't get enough today of this, really read the attachment A on parking management for housing affordability in complete communities, because I think it will, before we bring this back to the board, I would just direct you to that, because I think the staff did a great job of really explaining why we're even bringing this to you in the first place. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have any comments about this? The parking issue?
Well, I think Alexis stated her support for 0. I think I can live with 0 as well, along, with the caveat that we are looking at a complete program with in the town centers to address that.
And I'm assuming the 0.75 in the multifamily.
I'm not really comfortable with anything less than 0.75, to be honest with you. I mean, one of the people who commented earlier said that she doesn't have a car and she walks everywhere, and we have older people living in this community too, who don't have a luxury of walking or bicycling. you know, and they may need, if they're not comfortable taking public transportation, a lot of them aren't, I suspect, then they're gonna need a car. And I think 0.75 is a very low bar to cross. So I know I'm outnumbered, but I'm gonna stick by guns.
I appreciate it. I think like my parents are always giving me grief about this because they see it in Santa Barbara where they live. And they're like, who could get, I'm like, this is not for you. This is for a small segment of society. And we've got to deal with the other parts of that.
But your
they
parents
can't.
are well-to-do. There are a lot of older people.
No, I know,
who are not well-to-do.
but I mean, we're also going to have to work on how do we meet the needs of those people as well. So this is not meant to satisfy the needs of everyone in the basin. This is a small segment that we're working on, and we're going to be working on other segments. And I imagine that those people, elderly, poor people, especially if they need a car, they're probably going to be in more subsidized housing, which will be a lower level of affordability, most likely, that will require some public subsidy, like the Sugar Pine Village, I would
Well,
imagine.
Yeah, but this, for all intents and purposes, it's not subsidized with cash payments, but it is subsidized.
Yeah.
It's subsidized with incentives, right? So,
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we're exchanging money for height, density, and reduced parking, but we are targeting a certain group that doesn't necessarily need a car. And we know that there are people who fit that need, and we can give them this without any public money, and we can save that public money to help another group of people who have greater needs, I think. And that's, I think, that's the plan, is that this is one part of the huge problem of affordable housing in the basin. So do we have direction? Do we think? Are we?
I think we do, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Marshall would tell me not to ask you to vote. So, right, so we will take the packages we propose with 0 parking in town centers, 0.75, and multifamily areas. But if developer goes and wants to go below if it's 0, they have to show how they're going to meet the parking need.
Okay, less than 0.75, they have to show how they're going to meet their parking need.
Right.
Either
parking need
side.
at 0.75, is that still the bar they have to cross?
Yeah.
Or is it per unit, or is it per unit with a car?
No, what we will ask them, we will put in the code is that if they're doing parking below 0.75, they would need to show how they're going to meet.
The needs of
Sorry.
their tenants, depending
Right.
on the number of cars they have, right?
However, they're going to show it.
Okay, well,
mean,
we
they-
probably need to be more specific at some point.
Well, we will put in the code that they can go below 0.75 in town centers if they can demonstrate when they're getting their permit, how they will meet the parking needs of their tenants.
Okay.
And that could be a shuttle. So, we want to leave the flexibility there.
Great. So all right, so I guess that concludes this item. Do we have the stamina to roll on to the next item? I'd hate to keep people who have sat through all of this and to be turned away. Do you think we can get to this?
Staff certainly has the stamina.
Okay.
I was looking at the screen and knowing this is in Washoe County, and I'm not sure Board Member Hill is still here.
I've got the stamina.
All right.
All right,
Okay.
well then.
Let's
is
do it.
Let's
All
do
right.
it. I'd rather get it done. I think we have a lot of people who have joined us for this, so.
Okay.
All right, so that brings us to item number 4, informational presentation on the proposed amendments to the Washoe County Tahoe area plan to add schools, kindergarten through secondary as a permissible land use and special use within the Wood Creek regulatory zone for those parcels equal to or greater than 3 acres in size. Information on this agenda item can be found on page 301 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, since no action is being taken on this item, any member of the public is welcome to comment during the final public comment period. And we have received also a lot of written comments on this, both for and against. And so if you have submitted comments, we have read them, and we hope you can be brief in your verbal comments. So now we're going to have Jacob Stock from our staff. present this
Mr.
item.
Chairman, Jacob is not feeling well. He has
Oh.
not tested positive for COVID, but
Oh,
he
shoot.
thought, no, he's feeling good enough to do the presentation.
Okay.
So
Well, he's got a young child. He's not going to feel good for quite a while.
Well, I was gonna say that this is his first foray into the germ pool that young people bring home, but I think his child's not quite that old yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll turn it over to Jacob.
All right. Thank you, Jacob.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jacob Stock, Senior Planner for the record. Yeah, this one's on me. I caught a bug. It was my fault. But in the interest of the health, safety, and general welfare, which we're all about that, I know, I'm staying home and presenting remotely. So apologies for not being there in person. I'm here to present a potential amendment. This is an informational presentation only. Washoe County is considering an amendment to their area plan. The proposed change would allow an additional land use that uses K through 12 schools on sites of 3 acres or larger with a special use permit in the Wood Creek regulatory zone. And you can see the map up here on your screen that shows the Wood Creek regulatory zone in Incline Village, and highlighted in yellow are the properties that would potentially be affected by this amendment. Those are properties that are 3 acres or larger. So per our published process in the area plan handbook, Washoe County is seeking early RPIC input on potential issues related to this amendment, but not to any specific project. So for example, RPIC may indicate that traffic in the surrounding neighborhood and safety related to access on Mount Rose Highway should be addressed as a consideration of the amendment, but should refrain from speaking directly to any specific projects to the extent possible. So with that, I'll let you know about some specific projects that have been proposed for this area and are triggering this amendment. So there are 2 applications for projects that would be affected by this area plan amendment. The first is St. Clair's School, Tahoe, on the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church property. They requested a temporary use permit last year and a 6-month extension following that. Both were approved, and a second extension was requested. We granted the second extension on the condition that the applicant would pursue an area plan amendment. So then the second application is the Village Presbyterian Church. They have an application to create a Village Christian Academy on their site. Should the county decide not to move forward with the area plan amendment, staff would be forced to deny this application. If the amendment is approved, then a special use permit will be required for the school to be created. So Courtney Wyke from Washoe County is on the line with us today, and she's here to gather comments and answer any committee member questions, as well as myself. Although you won't be making a decision on or a recommendation on this item, you should invite public comment, and again, your comments and those of the public should be directed towards the amendment and not specific projects per the noticing of this item. So with that, I'll pass it on to Courtney and see if she has anything to add.
Yes, good afternoon. I guess I should say evening. This is Courtney Wyke, Washoe County Senior Planner. Thank you, Jacob, for that introduction. To clarify or reiterate, this is an applicant-driven request to Washoe County to consider amending the Tahoe area plan. For the county, the request is processed as a development code amendment to Article 220. At this time, the county has not taken any action or made any recommendations on the request. This is the first of many future potentially public hearings and outreach on the request. As I believe the introduction started, that we have received a number of comments fairly recently and over the last couple of months. So I'll try to kind of briefly summarize those into some broader categories. Generally speaking, commenters have expressed concern over traffic patterns, specifically safety concerns associated with neighboring streets and the maximum speeds and the nearby truck runaway ramp, increased parking demands and associated impacts, increased noise, fire safety, assertions that schools are maybe perhaps an inappropriate or incompatible use within the Wood Creek regulatory zone, and an acknowledgement that enrollment at Washoe County School District schools are down. Many in support have expressed a strong desire to have expanded school options, specifically for religious education opportunities for local families. With that, I would welcome any RPIC comment as well as public comment, and the next step in this process would be a staff recommendation to the Washoe County Planning Commission. And with that, I'm welcome for any questions.
Great. Any comments, questions? James?
Yeah, I just potentially have a bit of correction where Highway 28 meets the Mount Rose Highway, rather that very bottom lot that says State of Nevada. I believe that's where the Washoe County Sheriff's Department is, where the Washoe County Yard is. And I believe the top one that you have labeled as Washoe County is where the NDOT State Maintenance Yard is. I think you may have those switched.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from committee members?
So enrollment is down, so people are looking for other options other than public instruction. Okay. I mean, if it's a viable project, it's a viable project. I'm assuming the applicants have done their homework to determine that there would be sufficient number of students to enrolled in this institution to warrant the investment. So, I mean, I don't know that I have any questions other than to listen to public comments about concerns like traffic generation.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Alexis.
Thank you so much. I also want to listen to public comment and do want to disclose on the record that I've spoken to the applicants as well as many of the neighbors on this project. I also want to ask Ms. Wyke if she could clarify what other areas in the Tahoe area plan for Washoe County allow for schools, and it could be with an SUP or not.
Thank you, Member Hill. There are, sorry, I actually had this queued up as a question or a response to this question. Apologize. Okay, so the school use type is permitted outright in 2 of the 27 regulatory zones in the Tahoe area plan. And that's in the Incline Village commercial regulatory zone. And then it is also allowed in the Incline Village residential regulatory zone. And that would be subject to a special use permit. So overall, there would be 3 regulatory zones that allow this this use type.
Total right now.
Correct.
And do you know for other areas, and I hate to put you on the spot, so you can just say no, but for other areas, do they have more areas in Tahoe or just generally in Washoe County where they allow schools? Like in Washoe County, for example, the idea of allowing a school at other church sites, is that something that's common with an SUP? I'm just curious what that looks like.
I can't confidently respond to that. I do
That's
think
fine.
that's something I will look into
Thank you.
because I think that's a great question. I would say generally or more broadly in the greater Washoe County area, I think there is typically more flexibility for zoning in the school use in certain zoning districts. I don't know if Jacob Stock has any broader experience throughout the basin on where those school use types are allowed, if it's unique that there are so few in the Tahoe area plan.
I can look into that. I don't have an answer right now, but
Right.
I will look into that for you, Commissioner Hill.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? I guess, you know, when I look at it and when I heard the comments and read the comments, you know, it seems problematic that a lot of these properties border on a pretty busy, fast road. Actually, two of them. You know, it doesn't seem like if you were going to plan this from the beginning, that's where you would choose to put little children and parents who are frantically trying to drop off and pick up and take to soccer and all that. So I am concerned about that. I don't think it's something that they can't overcome. I just think it would require really good traffic management plans to be put in place and enforced. Our kids went to a private school that there were three private schools on 2 blocks next to each other in San Francisco with 1,000 families trying to pick up and drop off. And they had very strict rules, and they put out cones all around the neighborhood, and traffic was highly controlled, and they made it work. So I know it can happen, I think. But, you know, this is being driven by someone asking for it. And like I said, to me, it doesn't seem like a place where you would have wanted this to happen. I don't know if, I mean, but that's where the church is. So, I don't know, I guess I could be convinced with good traffic management plans that this could work, but it doesn't seem like a place that you would want to put schools in general. So I'd just like to get the county perspective on, you know, is this something you want? You think this is a great idea? So I think that would go to you, Courtney. Oh, you're on mute.
I apologize. I'm having a really difficult time hearing the people in person in the office. I believe the question was asking maybe a county position on the appropriateness of this use in this regulatory zone.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, at this time, I can't speak on behalf of the county until we go to the planning commission and receive a recommendation that either in support or in the latter to the Board of County Commissioners. I think as part of the process of considering the request, this is kind of, well, not the first step, but it is, we're taking all of the comments from today into consideration and going to be looking at many of those concerns from the neighbors and community members related to the potential impacts, and then we'll be making a recommendation. But at this time, I don't think I would be comfortable kind of expressing support for or the latter at this time.
Fair enough. All right, thank you. Any committee member comments before we go to public comment? Nope. All right, seeing none, we will go on to public. Oh, Shelley has one more.
for Washoe County staff, the St. Francis parcel, which is one of the two parcels being looked at, is their chief point of access off Old Mount Rose Highway, or is it off the street that bifurcates their property? I believe it's St. Francis of Assisi, and then there's a St. Francis. I don't know what, there's no direction arrow to the east.
Courtney, do you want me to address that?
Thank you so much, Bridget.
Okay, sorry. This is Bridget Cornell with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and I am the planner who issued the temporary use permits for the St. Clair School use of St. Francis of Assisi. And St. Francis has access both onto Mount Rose Highway as well onto Kelly Drive below the property. And St. Francis owns both of the, well, you can see it identified on that site plan that aerial view, that they do own both those parcels. So there is an entrance. In fact, part of the overflow parking is on the lower parcel. So you can access the property where the church is, both from Mount Rose Highway and from Kelly Drive.
Okay, great.
All right, any other comments? All right, then we'll move on to public comment. Anyone in the room who wishes to speak, you can come up to the podium.
Wish to speak, read directions. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for your time. My name is Anne Marie Lane. I'm a senior planner with Dell, and I'm representing two clients, Village Church and St. Clair's, who put in the original application to Washoe County. This agenda item has received 48 written comments in support and 20 written public comments in opposition. The purpose of my comments today are to address some of the concerns cited in those public comments. The first one is comments related to commercial use in residential areas. And the Wood Creek Regulatory Zone is one of 16 residential regulatory zones in Tahoe Area Plan. The area plan states that these regulatory zones focus primarily on single-family dwellings, but are intended to allow other use types such as multifamily and a broad scope of public services to serve the residential communities. So school use is categorized as a public service use in the Tahoe Area Plan, and the Tahoe Area Plan clearly indicates that that is an appropriate use to serve the residential communities around them. The second item I would like to address briefly is the preservation of neighborhood character. And the applicants have proposed an acreage restriction to preserve the existing neighborhood character throughout the internal corridors of Wood Creek. In addition, any application for a school would require a special use permit process, which does require neighborhood notification, a neighborhood meeting, and a public hearing. The 6 parcels that were shown highlighted on that map, they all have frontage along a major corridor in the area. And while the code amendment provides the acreage restriction to preserve the internal corridors of the neighborhood, I would like to point out that there are other characters or other factors, that's the word I'm looking for, factors that can impact the character of a neighborhood. One of those includes an estimated 48% vacancy rate of single-family homes in the area, which is pretty significant. The third item I'd like to address, 30 seconds, noise. The proposed amendment would not alter requirements related to noise levels, single noise events, or ground vibrations, nor would it alter the community noise equivalency level standards set forth in the existing area plan. The plan would continue to apply, and any application for a special use permit would be required to comply with those requirements. Lastly, traffic in relation to congestion and traffic safety on Mount Rose. Functionally, Mount Rose is identified as an urban minor arterial by the Nevada state standards. Notably, the corridor has a low injury crash rate of 0.22 crashes per million vehicle miles traveled, contrasted to the state average of 1.27 injury crashes per MVMT for the urban minor arterial function classification. And lastly, the Tahoe Area Plan and Mount Rose Scenic Byway Corridor Management Plan has identified 3 future improvement projects on Mount Rose Highway. One which includes a turn lane or creating a center turn lane along on Mount Rose Highway and Country Club Drive, and investigating possible additional turn lanes on their corridor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Oh,
While you're at the microphone, is this K through 12? What's being proposed?
So for the Development Code Amendment, the way that uses are defined by Washoe County, school use is primary and secondary combined. They're not separate. So what's being proposed for the Development Code Amendment is K through 12. Outside of the Development Code Amendment, what these 2 schools are proposing eventually, if the special use permit or if the amendment were to go through, is K through 8th.
So K through middle school, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
all right,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in person? Great.
Tim Gilbert with the Village Church. My comments are mostly passionate. What we want to accomplish at the 2 churches is to be able to raise our kids in a faith-based environment and teach them to know Jesus Christ. That is what we're after. We like that there's a lot of energy put into safety and the thought of safety. I mean, we were talking about putting some of our own kids and grandkids in these 2 environments, so that would be a top item for us as well. The reason that churches are used for alternative education is because they're open and they have big parking lots, and the schools typically don't use as much of the parking space and everything that's needed for the regular assemblies on Sundays. So this made it for us. We were thinking, what are we supposed to do as a church? And this seemed like a really good idea. In our community, this option isn't provided for. And so we thought this was a great way to attack that. There'll be other public comments, but thank you all for your time, and please vote yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. To economize your time, I would just like to add to what has just been said. I agree with what has just been said, but I would like to emphasize one aspect of it, and that is that unfortunately, K through 12 public education in Nevada consistently ranks 49th or 50th in the nation, and throwing more and more money at the problem has not changed this situation. Only more competition will, because giving parents an alternative to the dysfunctional public education system is the only way to truly incentivize the public schools here to improve. Our children deserve an education that will prepare them to succeed in life. Thank you for your consideration and your stamina.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? All right, seeing no one, I know we have 5 hands raised online. You want to start calling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We now have 6 hands raised online and 7. The first hand raised is Annabelle Cordoba Sosa. If you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, my name is Aníbal Córdoba Sosa. I'm a Incline Village resident where I've been living with my wife and 3 children for more than 10 years now. I'm also a director of a local nonprofit serving families in need in the entire North Tahoe region. Today, I'd like to fully support the implementation of regulatory zone amendments in the Wood Creek zone that will allow for permanent operation of St. Clair's School in the area. Its presence is critical to our community thriving and helps address an acute need as it allows families to access school choice for their children, expanding education opportunities that will ultimately reflect on a healthier and safer community. School options in the area are extremely limited and for many Latino and working families hard to access due to different factors that act as barriers, creating serious inequality in our community. The presence of St. Clair's also contributes to the fulfilling of the founding principle of religious freedom in the form of an educational project that serves the broad population. Since its inception, St. Clair's offers support and assistance to access its services to virtually every family interested in providing a faith-based education to their children. Without an expanded educational offer, the Incline Village community will not be able to offer its year-round residents, its workforce sustaining the community, a place to live and raise their families, reinforcing its concerning social and economic disparities, and sadly pushing them to leave the area to seek new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next hand raised is Will Phillips. Will, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name is Will Phillips. Hey, we're a local working class family. Our youngest child was born at home here in Incline. We're the people you were talking about earlier today when you're talking about affordable housing and the impacts of that. Well, that's very important, and so is having a school to send your kids, right? Because without the affordable housing, without having schools to go to, just affordable housing isn't enough to support a family, to support a community. I'm a combat disabled veteran, Iraq and Afghanistan, both wars, served my country, and wanted to find a place we could come live, and we were lucky enough to be here in Tahoe and raise a family. And we want to hope we can continue to do that. One of the committee members mentioned a busy road, Mountain Rose Highway, and concerns there. Well, actually, as was already mentioned, both of these locations can be accessed off the side road and don't have to be accessed directly off Mountain Rose Highway. So there's really no safety concern. In fact, to prove this, and that's not an opinion, to prove this, both of these locations already have children there doing schooling or daycare, and there have been no issues so far. So this is actually a good spot because you want to be close to an artery like Mountain Rose Highway for fire evacuation. You want to be away from the center of a neighborhood so you don't have that traffic in the neighborhood. So having it right there on near Mountain Rose Highway is actually the perfect location. I would say not a dangerous location. These kids aren't running around Mountain Rose Highway, right? These properties are adjacent to Mountain Rose Highways, but where these kids are coming into and out of school and playing isn't anywhere near the road. I can tell you that, and I think everyone who's been around the area can tell you that as well. Look, if this was in the middle of a neighborhood and small roads, there would be the issue of, hey, could the roads handle the traffic? So we know Mountain Rose Highway is a major artery. It can handle the minor amount of traffic increase that these schools will provide, considering how much traffic's already on Mountain Rose Highway. Look, this is a real community need. There's a long wait list. Our 1-year-old has been on a wait list since before he was born, and we're still not sure he's going to get into school when he's ready. And it's a real community need to have faith-based education. This isn't a service public schools can even provide. So it's not that public school is an option. For those of us who need faith-based education for our children, who I think some of us have earned that for our children, we need that to be able to have that option. Public schools, aside from the standard here in Nevada, just aren't an option. They can't provide that faith-based training we need. Look, there's one house, one of these locations you can get to without passing any houses, and one of them has one house that you have to pass that's already right on Mountain Rose Highway. Again, so the traffic that house is already getting from Mountain Rose Highway, no real major impact for that one house because these are not located in the center of the neighborhoods. Again, they're on the edge. Again, working class family here. We were lucky enough to get affordable housing. Now, please let us have a place we can send our kids to school, a faith-based choice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next hand raised is Gia Roundhorst. If you unmute, you can address the committee.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to make a public comment. As I've been listening to this meeting, I've learned a lot about the Tahoe region, and I appreciate the committee members' thoughtfulness in considering these issues. I myself have lived in Incline Village for 8 years, have been a parishioner of St. Francis for the entire time of 8 years. And my son is one of the original students of St. Clair's Tahoe starting in 3rd grade, and now he's in 8th grade. I fully support this school, even though as it moves forward, it would move forward without my family because I've run out of children to send there. I think it is a gift to the community. I would agree that the Village Christian School is also a gift to the community. For reasons that other speakers have brought up, it is a wonderful option to have in our community, to have a faith-based school choice. Both of these schools came into creation because of parents looking for a different option for their child. There's nothing wrong with the Incline Public Schools. There's nothing wrong with Lake Tahoe School in Incline Village. There's nothing wrong with the immersion program in Kings Beach. But we as parents were looking for something different. And I can imagine the Village Church School feels the same way. To address some of the concerns around the neighborhood, for one, I can attest that St. Clair's has a very publicized and every parent is trained on the traffic patterns expected, where to enter to drop a child for the day, where to park to walk your child for the day, and where to exit, and how not to impede traffic that is coming to or from the neighborhood. Using the Mount Rose Highway and the Kelly Drive, there is a traffic pattern that ensures that there's no cars going towards the houses on Kelly Drive, that there's no disruption by cars in the morning or in the afternoon by families that are taking their children to or from school. And I can appreciate wanting to protect the peacefulness of a neighborhood, but I cannot fully understand how the sounds of children laughing and playing and enjoying the beautiful setting that we have in Tahoe would be in any way disruptive. So thank you very much for allowing me to comment.
Thank you.
The next hand raised is Doug Flaherty. Doug, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Chair and members of the committee, Doug Flaherty speaking as a resident for Incline Village, Nevada. Yeah, I just want to preface this by saying I am so disappointed in our supposed representative from Washoe County on the committee, rather than asking some very positive questions about, how will this be able to enhance your children's education or your choice, school choice, or, how, or even saying, I think this may enhance religious freedom. The only thing that the representative could ask is, oh, do we have other schools in the area that, are near highways? That's unacceptable. So I hope when you get to voting next year, you remember that. So here's what I want to say. Like down in South Lake, you're going to run anyone who opposes this, and I totally support it. I totally support it for because of the fact that the school scores in Washoe County are in the toilet. It promotes our right to religious freedom, and to vote against it eventually would mean discrimination, religious discrimination, which is what they found out down in South Lake when they tried to prevent the Jewish temple or school, I guess it was down there. So there's ways of expressing support if you're an elected or appointed official to this committee that would embrace the community and speak for the community. As for the rest of you, I hope you recognize these very positive arguments. This is going to do nothing but enhance our community, and traffic plans will take care of the concerns of traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next hand raise is Paige Roodhouse. Paige, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to address everyone today. My name is Paige Roodhouse, and I am the Executive Director of St. Clair's Tahoe. My husband and I have been here for about 10 years, and we were both former naval officers. After serving our country, we've spent our time serving our community. After we were homeschooling up here for a couple of years, we saw the need for a Catholic school in our area, and we worked to meet that need by founding our school. We spent the first 4 years in Tahoe Vista. We have been in existence as a school serving Incline and the greater North Tahoe community for 5.5 years now. So this is our 6th year in operation as a local school. We currently serve 22 families and 45 students. I want to talk about why we can't go somewhere else. And that's been a lot of people say, just go somewhere else. The reason we don't want to go somewhere else is because St. Francis is our Catholic home. It's our spiritual and our religious home. And we have a right as Americans to raise our children in our faith. The Catholic Church, in its existence, we have to be in it to participate in our sacraments. Our children have to be able to come up and go to Mass. Many of our families attend Mass daily, and that's part of practicing our faith in its fullness. So I want to talk about what this school offers to our community. We are not only the only Catholic school in the basin. It is over a 40-minute drive over Mount Rose Highway to get to the nearest Catholic school. Until Village Church decided to join us in this effort, we have been the only Christian K-8 option in our area as well. We provide not only religious education, where students are able to participate in the sacraments that are essential to our faith, but we also provide schooling through the Montessori method, which is a unique method, a unique approach to children that encourages learning important skills like conflict resolution, responsibility, and self-agency from an early age. This hands-on method includes using special manipulatives to learn critical skills and allows each child to learn at his own pace. Because of our individualized learning process, we're able to serve students with learning differences who do really well in our classrooms. And we're committed to providing this kind of education to all members of our community. Our model of education is in high demand. We have already filled our incoming preschool class for next year and have an extensive waiting list. Because we believe that this kind of education should be available to all members of our community, we set reasonable tuition rates. We're half the price of our local private schools. We offer sibling discounts to help families with multiple children, and we've never turned away a family who's requested assistance. Currently, 25% of our families receive full financial aid assistance. The proposed zoning amendment would optimize the use of a building that's already serving hundreds of members of our community, and those hundreds are coming on the weekends and after school hours. So our 22 families are not affecting traffic flow in any negative way. Traffic safety, as we said, we're not dropping kids off on Mount Rose Highway. So we have a traffic plan in place to ensure safety. And I think that all the different noise and other considerations we can work together to address to be good community members and good neighbors. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next hand raised is Mike Skihan. Mike, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to comment. In general, I would like to comment in a positive manner towards this amendment. I have 3 kids in school at St. Clair's. I've watched them flourish over the handful of years that we've been here as residents. I echo many of the comments that other folks have made in support of the amendment, and I won't waste words in reiterating them. The only thing that I will say by virtue of reiterating is that this school, St. Clair's, and I'm assuming the same can be said for the school at Village Church, does contribute positively to the community overall. The family is the building block of society, the fundamental building block of society. And these schools are focused on creating good human beings that contribute both within the family and outside of it, which can only possibly be a net gain for our culture as a whole. So thank you for allowing me to comment, and I am aggressively in support of these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last hand raised is Debbie Larson. Debbie, if you unmute, you can address the committee.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I've been an Incline resident for 25 years. My husband and I raised our 4 sons going through Incline's public schools. And I just want to echo that we truly believe that St. Clair's is a gift to the community, one that we really wish our kids could have enjoyed. Christian education in general, and St. Clair's in particular, emphasizes caring for others. So that means more Catholics, more Christians, means more community building concern, events, and activities. In fact, right now, I'm supposed to be at a presentation at the parish that's open to the broader community by Awaken. They're doing this presentation their mission is to increase awareness and education on commercial sexual exploitation. They also have presentations on affordable housing. I'm sure some of the people listening, if they're still around, were there for that. And community service is part of the Christian curriculum. I've heard people express concern that permitting another school would take kids away from the public schools, but this is an entirely different market. The people interested in St. Clair's either homeschool or are seeking a private school, not necessarily a religious one. In fact, 50% of the 40 students at St. Clair's are not even Catholic. It's important to remember we're talking about a small school with a zoning amendment containing size restrictions that ensure the integrity of the neighborhood. And please note, this is a neighborhood that the church has been in since 1965. In fact, the church has been teaching religious education classes for decades, an after-school program where parents drop off up to 100 kids in the afternoon and then they pick them up. We have never had a kid running on the highway that I've noted or ever heard about. For decades, people have been going to masses, 3 on Sunday and 1 on Saturday every week. The church capacity is over 300 people, and still we haven't had accidents. This school really isn't a new use in terms of traffic and safety. There are weddings, funerals, and again, this is a much greater volume than what we're talking about with this small school. Please consider, beyond expanding our limited education options at the lake, that the future of our community depends on the kids like these, who will grow to be strong, community-oriented adults. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like that's the end of online public comment.
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, we'll close public comment then. Any comments from committee? Shelley?
I'm supportive of this code amendment. I know that in Carson City, and it's not unique to other communities, but residential uses have grown up around schools. I mean, they're right in the middle of subdivisions, and I don't think there have been many instances when people have been concerned about the children, how they behave, and if they, I mean, we're not talking about high school students. High school students are a little bit different because they are, they're experiencing their independence as adults, but we're talking about, and I know this is not project specific, but I think it does make a difference that this is kindergarten age through 8th grade, and I think having choice when it comes to the education of your kids is very important. And I can't imagine that this use would be disruptive.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else? Cindy?
I would just agree that I'm supportive of this amendment.
Great. I don't really like it being on the highway, but they're a lot smaller actually than I thought they were. And that's where the churches are. So I think it's, I mean, and my kids really flourished at their Catholic schools. So I have a great fondness for that education and what you guys are trying to do, build a nice community. So I think we are, oh, great, Alexis, I'm sorry, I forgot to look at you
Thank you,
again.
Mr. Chairman. And I don't want my questions to be mistaken, which it seems like they were. It was to show that there aren't a lot of areas to have schools in the area plan. And I think we're finding from Washoe County that there were a lot of misuses when we went through the original area plan update. So I also don't see any major issues with this.
Great, thank you. Now, were we supposed to provide any input to Washoe?
I think you and the public just did.
All right,
That was
that's,
the purpose of this.
all right,
And you'll see it next, if they decide to continue with it, you'll see it
okay,
sometime in the near future.
okay, great. All right, so if there's no further comments, then we will close this item and move on. That brings us to item number 5, upcoming topics. As a reminder to the public, the committee discussion on this, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. Since this item is informational only, members of the public are welcome to comment at the final public comment item. John?
Yes, ones that I know are coming are housing amendments. And this, if it comes to fruition, there's a series of amendments coming for the Placer County Tahoe Basin Area Plan, I believe, although the Board of Supervisors meeting is later this month. I'm assuming that'll move
Next month,
forward.
October.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I keep thinking we're in October.
We're not quite there
wishing-
yet. Don't rush it.
Yeah, I should enjoy every day I have left. And
Getting morbid at this hour.
yeah, sorry. Let's see. We're meeting with Douglas County. We don't know exactly when the amendments will be coming, but there will be something coming related, just general updates and related to the Barton project. And I'm trying to think of what else. Washoe has some potential amendments, but you all know in your staff report, we've tried to switch it to 2 6-month cycles each year. So a lot of these will probably be in the next cycle. So that's enough, I think. You got plenty coming is the bottom line.
All right, let's see, let's see, I guess we're going to public comment on this item. No? Oh, what's that? Oh, committee member comments. All right, any committee members have any comments on this? All right, go to public comment on this item. All right, anyone in person? No one's here. Anyone online? Oh, we have Mr. Flaherty, his hand raised.
Mr. Flaherty, if you unmute.
Thanks, Chair, members of the committee. You can blame John Hester for this. So, so you were a little bit misled on the Attorney General CEQA, best practices. While there exists an opinion that more concentrated development within town centers versus development outside of town centers may prevent ignitions, the reality is that all businesses and residential population areas within the basin, including dense concentrated town centers and mixed-use areas, exist within the Nevada and California wildland urban interface, and specifically on the California side, for the California State Fire Marshal, most of the built environment geographical area is classified as a very high fire hazard severity zone. The intent of that comment by the Attorney General was to say, hey, generally applied throughout California, if you are going to build, let's say, in an area that doesn't have wind and slope, and you're not in a very high fire hazard severity zone, or your entire community is not in the wildland urban interface, maybe there might be an argument about reduced ignitions within dense town centers. However, the reality is the Paradise Fire came from outside the community. It wiped the whole community out. The Maui fire started on the outskirts of the community, not in the dense town center, wiped it out. The Little Valley supposed control burn on the part of the Nevada Division of Forestry started way up on the mountain, and the wind swept it down the mountain and wiped out ranches and homes. So Mr. Hester's comments, well, I appreciate the thoroughness of the staff. It doesn't apply here. Ignitions come from all different aspects. I put a public records request in the Forest Service and said, you know, how many, what are the fires in the Tahoe Basin caused from? And they said, oh, it's campfires. And then I found a little note that somebody had replied within the Forest Service, and he said, well, we know that's all bullshit. So, and he used those exact words. So we've got some problems out there, and but ignitions within town centers, that is not an argument not to do a complete, thorough evacuation analysis and follow all the items within the California Attorney General's best practice. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Looks like we have one more hand raised. Ann?
Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. I'm sorry this has been so long, but once again, this is really the housing issue. Achievable is not affordable. This is just an adjustment to more development, and it's social engineering to solve the traffic problem. And there's no evidence or proof. You guys throw this stuff around, oh, it worked in Vail or what. I'd like to see some evidence of where it's worked. It's a problem all over the country. And you know, I just am so sorry to see that the league is now signing on with the TRPA about this. But thank God for MAP and the other conservation groups. And thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. All right, it looks like there's no more hands raised. So we'll close public comment on this item. Assuming there's no more committee. Oh, we have one committee comment.
No,
Shelley?
I'm moving to adjourn.
Oh. Do you get to go all the way down there? They have so many more things on my list of what I'm supposed to go through, but I'll take it. Yes. All right. We have a motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you. Thanks to the staff for that meeting, for a long day.